Welcome to Planning Committee South. We're not expecting a fire drill today, and if the alarm sounds, please leave the building through the emergency exits marked outside. The meeting will be recorded and then uploaded to YouTube following the meeting. Therefore, any members of the public present should be aware that they may be recorded, and even if they are not participating in the meeting. If this causes you concern, please let me know. Please can you switch your phones to silent for the duration of the meeting. Any applications and all presenting. The chair will announce the agenda item number, and the planning officer will introduce the application with any relevant updates and provide a visual representation to aid members' understanding of the context of the application. The chair will call on public speakers to present in accordance with the public speaking arrangements. The chair will then ask for members and officers if they have any points of clarification on the points that have been raised by the public speakers. The chair will then ask members if they have any technical questions of the officers. Following that, the entire committee then will discuss and debate the application. Members may seek further clarification of A, particular points from officers regarding the application, or B, points raised by the speakers in the main debate through the chair. Officers will respond to issues and questions raised by members. The committee will then make a decision by vote. I have 3 apologies for absence, but
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillor Jason Baker, Councillor Jenny Kenton and Councillor Peter C.
And the next item is to elect a vice chair for this meeting. I have a proposed one there.
I'll second that.
And can a quick vote on that? Thank you. I have the sad duty to inform members of the passing of Planning South Officer Nick True. True. I apologise. Nick's mother is making a word cloud and has invited everyone who knew Nick to send 3 words to best describe him. Please send your 3 words to Nicky Horn. Ask members to hold 1 minute silence. You can stand. Thank you. Next item is to approve minutes from the previous meeting. Can I have your paper, please? And propose, have a second of the accepting that. Oh, we haven't voted on it, yes, right. Okay. Do you want me to sign it? Any matter, any declarations of interest relevant to this meeting?
Yes, Chair. Item number 6. Item of very interested to leave the meeting because my employer has a contract with the capital.
Sue.
Thank you. I have to declare an interest because I'm the ward member for Elminster, which covers this application side. Thank you.
We have no public. Sorry,
I also have to declare an interest as I'm a ward member for Mudford.
and then,
Thank you, Chair. I've shown interest in application number 5 as a board member.
we have no members registered under public question time. So I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to change the order. So item number 7 will be next, which is Nikki talking through the planning and appeal information.
Thank you, Chair. There is just one case this time, so it's on page 123 of the papers. So this is an appeal for 7 dwellings. It was allowed. The key issues in this case, as you'll see from the summary on page 123, is the character and appearance and also heritage. So having assessed the proposal, the inspector concluded that this development proposal was acceptable in this case. Does anyone have any questions about that appeal?
Yes, just a comment from me as the board member for Cobra. This was an interesting one simply because of the boundary. So if anyone who's interested in these matters, so if you look at the boundary between Coker and Stoke, this field is carved out and it's actually in East Stoke. The reason why this I think is interesting, here's where we are, is that one of the questions in our local plan scope of consultation relates to whether East Stoke and Montague should be deemed as one settlement or the boundary should be moved or something like that. I think that this appeal raises questions about, or it might help people, it might help inform people in how they might respond to that about whether Montague and East Stoke should have their boundaries moved. It was an interesting point, or I thought it was interesting anyway. So there you go.
Councillor Wood.
Sorry, I probably haven't read it properly. Was there a cost order?
No, it wasn't.
Thank you. That's good.
Okay. Moving on to item 5. This is 25/01367/S73. Land north of Mudford Road, Yeovil, Somerset. Ask the planning officer to run through the details.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This application relates to land at North Mudford Road, Yeovil. It's section 73 application seeking to vary conditions attached to the outline planning permission referenced on the screen, granted on appeal in March 2024. There are a number of updates since publication of the report to brief members on. Firstly, an error in the wording on page 32 has been identified and should refer to outline planning permission rather than full plan permission. Secondly, an additional letter of support has been received by Bloor Homes, who have the live reserve matters in currently on this site, as the applicant for that application. Finally, discussions remain ongoing regarding condition 14, with some debate over the need for this condition. Advice is currently being sought from Wessex Water, which will determine its inclusion or not. As said, this is a section 73 application. The principle of development has already been established through the 2024 decision. The application seeks amendments to conditions 5, 9 and 14 relating to the approved parameter plan, phosphate mitigation strategy and the 150 metres exclusion zone respectively. Important to note that the application does not seek to increase the numbers of dwellings, amend the approved access or revisit the principle of development. Now onto the site plans on the screen. These slides show the site and its context. The site lies to the north of Mudford Road on the northern edge of Yeovil and extends towards the Yeo Valley. You can see the relationship with the surrounding countryside and adjacent sewage works to the northwest. And a slightly bigger scale version here. Now for the satellite images, you can clearly see the site's relationship with the north edge of Yeovil and the countryside beyond to the north of Mudford Road. And again, closer in there. Now for a background now on the appeal. So as I noted, the Outline Planning Commission was granted on appeal back in 2024. The appeal was accompanied by an environmental statement and assessed as environmental impact assessment. Through that process, the inspector considered and found acceptable the points on the screen there. The inspector concluded that the development would result in moderate adverse landscape effects and conflict with elements of the development plan. However, these harms were found to be outweighed by the delivery of market and affordable housing, together with the economic, ecological and social benefits of the development. And planning permission was therefore granted. This slide compares the appeal illustrative master plan with the revised illustrative master plan submitted through this section 73 application on the right-hand side. The key change relates to the northwest part of the site where the constructed treatment wetland previously sat. The overall development framework remains unchanged. So focusing now on the section 73, this application for us. So the principal change proposed is the removal of the constructed treatment wetlands and its replacement with a revised sustainable urban drainage strategy based phosphate mitigation strategy. And I'll be referring to this as SUDS for this presentation. Because the overall commission was environmental impact development, the applicant has submitted an environmental statement addendum to assess whether any new or materially different significant environmental effects would arise. The environmental statement addendum assessed transport, flood risk, ecology, landscape, heritage, ground conditions, and socio-economic effects. Across all topics, the conclusion is that there would be no new or materially different significant environmental effects compared to those assessed through the original environmental statement. So in summary, no material transport impacts arise. The revised drainage strategy remains acceptable. Nutrient neutrality and BMG, biodiversity net gain, remain achievable. Landscape changes are acknowledged, but remain capable of delivering an acceptable framework. I'll go into that point later in the presentation. No new heritage impacts arise. The original ground conditions assessment remains valid, and no new effects are identified there. And housing and economic benefits remain unchanged. So on to now phosphate mitigation and green infrastructure. So as I've said, the appeal scheme relied on a constructed treatment wetland to achieve nutrient neutrality. The current proposal instead uses an integrated SUDS-based approach, which performs both drainage and phosphate mitigation features. The former wetland area remains green infrastructure land, and the plan for the intentions for that part of the site is in the middle of the screen. A new landscape condition is proposed to secure the design and landscape principles for this area at reserve matter stage. And just to note, the the SUDS feature proposal is not shown in detail here, as this will come forward under the reserved matters. This comparison table on screen summarises the principal differences. The constructed treatment wetland is removed and replaced with a SUDS-based phosphate mitigation strategy. Condition 5 is amended to reference the revised parameter plan. Condition 9 and 14 are amended rather than removed, subject to the latter being discussed with Wessex Water further, and a new landscape condition is proposed. Importantly, there is no increase to the number of dwellings, no change to the approved access arrangements, and no change to the development parcels. So this application formally concerns conditions 5, 9 and 14. 2 additional conditions are proposed. One securing the landscape principles for the northwest part of the site, condition 15, and another relating to the Ministry of Defence aviation safeguarding requirements, condition 16. The remaining appeal conditions are largely reimposed, with some minor rewording where necessary. Overall, onto the planning balance. Officers acknowledge that the removal of the constructed treatment wetland alters elements of the landscape, placemaking and green-blue infrastructure originally proposed. The proposal would result in moderate adverse landscape effects, and note that was the case also at the time of the appeal. This has been carefully considered and carries weight in the planning balance. However, the revised nutrient mitigation strategy is supported by Natural England, the ecologist, and the technical consultees. The environmental statement addendum confirms that there are no new or materially different significant environmental effects, which officers agree with. Taking all matters into account, officers conclude that the amended scheme remains acceptable in planning terms and recommends approval subject to deed of variation to the Section 106 agreement and the recommended planning conditions. The original consent, the appeal permission, is already subject to a Section 106 agreement. Those obligations remain in place and continue to apply to this development. The principal purpose of the deed of variation is to update the nutrient neutrality provisions to reflect the SUDS-based mitigation strategy. A draft version of the deed of variation is published on the website for wider review, still in draft format, however, and under negotiation. Many thanks, and that's the end of the presentation.
We'll move on to public speakers. And for the first person, Duncan Woodward, would like to take it. The Scott Group. You have 3 minutes, and so it's the first. Yeah,
When it's red, it's ready to sit down if you like.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Duncan Woodward. I speak today on behalf of 3 Villages Flood Group, representing the downstream communities of Mudford, Ashington and Chiltern County. When the planning inspector granted permission in March of 2024, he did not consider the cascading wetlands simply as phosphate mitigation. He considered them as public site, sustainable drainage system and green infrastructure before separately considering their phosphate mitigation role. I would like to draw the committee's attention to Somerset Council's Level 1 Strategic Flood Risk Assessment published in February of this year. This is the council's own strategic flood evidence prepared specifically to inform planning decisions. It promotes a catchment-based approach, encouraging developments to improve flood resilience wherever possible. The inspector considered these wetlands as part of the site's sustainable drainage system and green infrastructure, and the SFRA promotes a similar philosophy. And yet the justification for their removal is almost entirely based on phosphate mitigation. We believe the planning officer's report adopts a much narrower approach than that promoted by the Somerset Council's own SFRA. The recommendation before you reflects that narrow approach. Even so, the officer's report acknowledges the loss of wider flood resilience benefits. The lead local flood authority put on record it was incredibly disappointed at this potential loss of flood resilience. So before you vote, we ask you to consider three questions. Firstly, where has this proposal been assessed against the wider catchment principles contained within Somerset Council's own strategic flood risk assessment? Secondly, where is the data, the evidence comparing the approved cascading wetlands with the replacement drainage system, demonstrating the equivalent flood storage, attenuation and protection for downstream communities? And thirdly, if the council's own flood strategy encourages developments to improve catchment resilience where possible, why is it acceptable to remove a feature that the lead flood authority acknowledges provided wider flood resilience benefits? If these wetlands are removed from the permission, the opportunity they provide will be lost permanently. So if members cannot be satisfied that those questions have been answered clearly, we respectfully ask you to defer this application until that evidence has been provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dutton. I now call on James Carey. The next three speakers are for Friends of Mudford Action Group. I ask you three to possibly not duplicate between yourselves the points you're making.
James Carey, Friends of Mudford Action Group. I'm the chair, as it turns out. I wonder if you're in the same position as me when you feel like Trigger from Only Fools and Horses, who is not the sharpest tool in the drawer and insists on calling Rodney by the name Dave. I felt like Trigger reading this section 73 application 25/01367. Bewildered and confused, I'd forgotten just exactly what had been approved on appeal on the 18th of March 2024. What is it? 25 dwellings which would, the inspector concluded, result in, paragraph 5.1, harms that included adverse landscape effects and conflict with elements of the development plan. But these harms were outweighed by the delivery of market and affordable housing and associated economic, social and ecological benefits. That would include woodland planting, ecological buffers, sustainable drainage system, and a biodiverse wetland habitat. That sounds good, doesn't it? So the proposal was passed by the inspector despite the acknowledged harms and adverse effects. But that is not what the proposal is now. In 12.4, we read that the removal of the constructed treatment wetland, for reasons that I'm not clear on at all, results in the loss of landscape character, visual interest, placemaking value, and associated environmental benefits, especially when compared to the appeal-approved scheme. Would this scheme have been approved back in 2024 otherwise? Who can say? Well, you can say. In fact, you've not had your say on this scheme as it was approved by an inspector, not this planning committee. What we have in front of us is Trigger's broom. Trigger swore that he'd had the same broom for 20 years. And when challenged, he said this old broom's had 17 new heads and 14 new handles in its time. To which someone asked, how the heck can it be the same broom? It isn't, is it? That's the joke. One might ask a similar question of what is before us now. Without the biodiverse wetland habitat, how can it be the same scheme? Which may well not have been granted permission in the first place without these environmental benefits. This is not a joke. It's deadly serious for the communities affected by this application. So I urge the committee to think very carefully before approving this section 73 application. Thank you for your time.
Perfect time. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Michael Higgs.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
My name is Mike Higgs. I live, I'm pleased to say, in Medford. Forgive me when I get my glasses on, that's a feature of age. You know. I really did, I speak, I beg your pardon, get close to the mic. Ah, sorry, I beg your pardon. Can everyone hear me? That's unusual, my wife says she can hear me too much, but thank you very much. Thank you very much for your help. Okay, thank you. I'm here actually on behalf of FOMAG and indeed a number of residents who I regularly come into contact with, and also on behalf, I work in conjunction with Medford Parish Council and its many excellent councillors on this particular development. I'd like to talk to you today about the deed of variation, such matters I have a little bit of professional knowledge on. And it is possible, I only say possible, you may not have our councillors been able to digest the deed of variation, since I have to say it was only recently, in my opinion, disclosed. I'm bound to say though, it is inconsistent with, and actually bears no resemblance whatsoever with the original planning approved and the corresponding 106, and particular reference to the environmental mitigation. I'm also bound to say, from my professional background, this substantially changes what was consulted on in both process and procedure. I put it to you that actually the consultation process is now null and void because of substantial change. I only have 3 minutes and I fully understand that, but I'd like to draw your attention on the deed of variation to Schedule 7, which is totally new. Clearly, the planning inspector, as you've heard, approved in outline the development on the basis of the wetland, which is now completely deleted. The developer, if you read the deed of variation, appears to have the unfettered right to implement a phosphate mitigation strategy and/or simply purchase phosphate credits. Instead of a single mitigation strategy, which had been approved, as I've said before, by the planning inspector, with a clearly defined constructive treatment wetland, we now have yet, and I put this in the most strongest terms to you all, a vague, unknown, undisclosed phosphate mitigation measures. On introspection, I ask all of you, do you know actually what those measures are? Have they been disclosed to you? And if they haven't, do you not think we, all of us, should have had them? Simply put, I consider that Somerset Council, and I'm not being rude to anyone in Somerset Council, have not fully briefed you or as deciding members or the statutory consultee, Medford Parish Council, on what these so-called measures are and mean in terms of attenuation, monitoring and auditing. It's quite remarkable. It's actually quiet and silent on the subject of how they are maintained and who pays for them. The lack of transparency, I believe, is difficult for you as members, and I have some concerns for you, and I genuinely do. I don't think you have the full bag of tricks to make a decision. To correct this wrong, I think there are a number of fundamental questions you, as our committee members, as our elected councillors, may wish to ask. First question, has the revised strategy been independently reviewed? And it is a revised strategy. If it has been reviewed, which is normal practice, where is it? I can assure you I know my way around documents and websites. I can't find it anywhere. But if it is, I ask the council, can we please have it to analyse it?
If you come to a conclusion, you've had.
I will. I heard before that Natural England have agreed to this change. Can we have the evidence, please? Do we have a letter anywhere from Natural England to say that they've done that? It's in the converse. In summary, thank you for giving me the time. I appreciate it. And all we want is evidence which says what the planning inspector agreed we have the equivalent of in terms of these changes.
But I think you'll find when you analyse it, we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. And now call on Dawn Woodward.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. As you just heard, my name is Dawn Woodward and I'm a resident of Mudford. I'd like to focus on flood risk and the importance of some new evidence that has emerged since outline planning permission was granted. On 3rd of March 26, the Environment Agency on behalf of DEFRA published its natural flood management heat maps. These heat maps identify land where natural flood management measures such as wetlands and ponds have the greatest potential to reduce flood risk and deliver wider environmental benefits. The Sock Hill site that we are discussing today has been identified as a high opportunity location by DEFRA itself. So this S73 application proposes removing a constructed wetland from a site that government now identifies as having high potential for natural flood management. As councillors, before you make your decision today, I would simply ask for reassurance that this important new government evidence has been fully considered as part of the planning officer's assessment and the planning balance. If it has, where can we see that assessment? And if it has not, why not? There's also important new local evidence. So working with the Yeovil Rivers Community Trust, rainfall has been monitored for 3 years at a location within half a mile of this development site. That local monitoring has recorded rainfall levels approximately 37% higher than the average rainfall figures used in the developer's drainage modelling. This raises a question. Should we be removing natural flood management features where local evidence suggests that this catchment experiences significantly higher rainfall than the modelling assumes? Finally, we now know that additional developments are proposed to discharge surface water into the same network of ditches and brooks as this development that we're discussing today. And that makes it increasingly important to consider the cumulative impact on downstream communities and not simply to consider each development in its own right. So members, before you, you've got some new important government evidence, you've got some new rainfall data, and we now have a much better understanding of this catchment than was available when outline planning permission was granted. I therefore respectfully ask you to refuse this S73 application. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Philip Sargent, who's a local resident.
Chair, I'm kind of blind, so I can't see which is the green and red light. You're on. Thank you, Chair and committee members. I would like to remind the committee this application is in the rural parish of Mudford. Public comments on this application have been limited. When I speak to people, comments include accessing documents is challenging, so many amendments. It is technical and complex, which I'm sure the committee can sympathise. Please, members, I urge you to consider further comments. Who has control of assessing, reporting, monitoring, and what enforcement will there be against failures if phosphate levels are not achieved? Funding of long-term maintenance to drainage, the attenuation holding ponds, and importantly, the brook that is to take the volume of water from the site. The application words look thin and lack clarity. The proposed ponds are filled by the site water runoff. Contamination from washing cars, vehicle oil leaks, etc. will go into them. Nature currently slows and filters escarpment water via the many watercourses before it reaches the Yeo. Now it suggests the water will all come down the hill via a brook straight into the Yeo. Excess phosphate contamination will not be treated as the treatment centre is upstream. There has been no public consultation for the residents of Mudford from the onset of this development and this application. Therefore, the committee has been unable to take advantage of key, long-standing local knowledge of the escarpment. For years, parish properties, including the Lost Village in Wangle Wood, near the development, benefited from the many spring lines and watercourses from the escarpment. Remnants of wells and wind sail pumps are still very evident. At the village cemetery, when a grave is dug and hits a spring line, sadly, it fills very quickly. The village gentleman, whose vast knowledge of the underground watercourses came from his dad, who maintained Stone Lane sewage works and a pumping station near the development, he would say they will not know what hit them when they start digging into that escarpment. I urge the committee to not only consider surface water, but also the many underground spring lines and watercourses which greatly affect this application. It took years of planning and experts regarding the dualling of the A303. Local knowledge on spring lines was ignored. This demonstrates how things can go horribly wrong. Villages now flood that have not flooded before. The attenuation pond near Hazel Grove School, even after this dry weather, is full. Please, it is imperative that the pressure to build and pass planning amendments at all costs should not be a reason to pass this application. And also, the village would like further consultations on any further amendments, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to call out Colin Downs, who's representing Copperfield Limited.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So my name is Colin Downs. I represent Blore Homes, who are the owner of this site. We've already met with Mudford Parish Council twice, as well as Yeovil Without Parish Council and Friends of Mudford Action Group to present and discuss the first phase of the detailed design proposals for the site and the programme of delivery. As landowner and developer, Blore Homes supports LVA's proposals today to remove the cascade from the outline planning permission and to amend the relevant conditions and obligation. Blore Homes notes that the applicant's proposals are supported by Natural England, confirmation of which was received in May 2025 following early consultation. Blore Homes would like this planning committee to consider the following points. The cascade forms no part of the surface water management of the scheme for this site. It pumps water 24/7, or it would do, from the watercourse and discharge it at the same rate downstream. It's effectively like a closed loop system. All surface water management on the site is addressed through other sustainable features on site within the catchment and achieves the required level of mitigation set by the lead local flood authority. There's no loss of flood resilience here, and we've been very careful to make sure that happens throughout the rest of the site. The proposed cascade was to remove from the development and rebalance the impact of development. Natural England agrees that the cascade is no longer needed to achieve that balance. The cascade would be a substantial and engineered set of filtration basins with a significant carbon impact through both the construction materials, construction itself, and the permanent running of pumps. Not building the cascade will therefore reduce environmental impact, which is quite unusual in this circumstance. The cascade will be a substantial and unnecessary long-term cost for residents whose management company will be responsible for the maintenance and repair. And if it's not needed, why put them under that pressure? The land will instead be planted to enhance biodiversity on site, forming an important part of the wider public open space strategy for existing and future residents. It's not a development site, it's purely to be put back to reuse as green space. All Homes are fully committed to delivering that wider green infrastructure strategy, and the landscape proposals include an alternative sustainable reed bed system, and that's in the phase 1 proposals. Without the cascade, the enhanced 20% biodiversity, and I guess that's double the normal requirement, will still be delivered. A new biodiverse reed bed wetland is proposed in phase 1 instead, as I've just mentioned. So, Bloor Homes supports the alternative strategy. It seems a sensible approach to the way you might deal with changing circumstances, which includes an enhanced green infrastructure, and considers this to be a much more robust and more durable approach for the site and the local community, both new and existing, rather than constructing an engineered cascade which is no longer needed. Bloor Homes therefore respectfully asks members to support the officer's recommendation, which is thoroughly considered and has been looked at over a long period of time, and recommend and support the recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. We now call Robin Bowring from Mudford Parish Council.
Thank you. Chairman, councillors, thank you. Mudford Parish Council, on behalf of their residents, continue to object to the removal of the wetlands area under section 73. Mudford Parish is a close-knit community and work closely with Friends of Mudford Action Group and the Three Villages Group, the three villages being Mudford, Ashington and Chiltern County. Both these groups regularly report to the Parish Council at meetings. Mudford Village has many issues, such as the volume and speed of the traffic on the A359, but flooding is probably the top of the list of our concerns. There have been two iterations of the Bloor Homes Sustainable Drainage Plan, placed in the public domain. The last in April this year. In both, it states that in an exceedance event, the excess water will be channeled to the wetlands area. If the wetlands area is removed, then where does it go? Earlier this year, a meeting was held with the developers of Bloor Homes, Parish Council and FOMEC, as you've just heard. The section 73 for the wetlands area was raised, and Bloor Homes stated that if the section 73 was not approved, they would revert back to the original plan and it would not affect the remainder of the bill. In summary, following all that you've heard from the previous speakers, you've had evidence that the original planning application, the section 106, appeared to be bypassed. To use section 73 for changes of this magnitude are fundamentally wrong and not appropriate at best. You've been posed a number of basic questions which need to be answered so that you and the general public can form a valid view and make an informed decision. I suspect you, like us, Somerset residents, do not have immediate answers to some of these questions. Arising from this unacceptable position for all of us, we do urge you, as our councillors, to firstly defer this decision until and when you do have the answers and they're put in the public domain. And secondly, given the status of the deed of variation, ensure that consultations also take place in the public domain. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have our final speaker, Alex Bullock. BA.
Members, my name is Alex Bullock and I'm the Associate Partner and Head of Planning at LDA. I'm speaking in my role as planning agent for this application. Thank you for this opportunity. We were the applicants for the 22 application, which ultimately determined that appeal in 2024. As you heard from officers, the section 73 application before you proposes almost the exact same scheme with only one difference, that being the proposed phosphate mitigation solution. As members are acutely aware, a lot has changed since 2022 in terms of phosphate considerations, both in terms of the method of assessment, the technical considerations, particularly through changes in drainage guidance, and also the range of potential solutions. It's the case where the previously proposed Cascade wetlands only formed part of the scheme so as to mitigate the phosphate impact of the scheme in the absence of a reasonable alternative. The revised scheme before you proposes a different approach with that compared to the outline granted at appeal in terms of the phosphate mitigation. But it does so informed by more detailed information obtained from on-site ground investigations, but also with the full support of Natural England, the council's ecologists and your planning officers. And the range of information that is provided in relation to phosphates is almost identical in terms of a phosphate mitigation report and accompanying environmental assessment of that. Since the appeal decision, the site has been sold to Bloor Homes. Bloor Homes have been actively pursuing bringing the site forward and with it the timely delivery of dwellings, but as importantly, wider investments and the delivery of local infrastructure improvements. This is not therefore a site which is going to sit idle. This is a site where a respected developer is spade ready to get on and deliver. I don't need to say much more given that the matters have been comprehensively set out in the officer report. It is the case that the Section 73 application before you, if permitted, would grant a new and separate permission. It is not an either or choice, but one about the evaluation of whether the revised proposals are acceptable in policy terms, given the balance of considerations and the application of the Tilbury balance. We're in a position whereby the only change to the scheme is how phosphates are mitigated, and that we now have a developer ready to start delivery. All other considerations are all but identical to those at the time of the public inquiry and are all supported by technical consultees. It is the case, therefore, that it's not just the applicant who said the benefits of the proposals outweighed the harms, nor is it just also your planning officers who have reached the same conclusion. But importantly, a planning inspector who opined in 2024 to grant planning permission, having made a balanced judgment. I would urge you to follow the clear officer recommendation before you and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, for the planning officer to respond to questions raised.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a couple of points of clarification on the application's validity and determination. As the decision makers, we are required to consider the development as proposed by the Section 73 application, rather than simply deciding whether the previously approved scheme was preferable. The Section 73 application, if approved, would result in a new planning permission, and it must therefore be determined on its own merits. So essentially, it's not a question of whether the appeal approved scheme or the revised scheme is preferable. The question is whether the development proposals through the Section 73 application remain acceptable in planning terms, having regard to all material considerations as aligning with the final speaker. And just a point on Speaker 6's point that the concern that the Section 73 is not the correct planning route. It's considered that the proposed amendments can lawfully be considered under Section 73. The principle of development, the number of dwellings and the approved access arrangements all remain unchanged, as does the description of development. Thank you.
So just picking up on a couple of further points. So a couple of the speakers were asking, where's the evidence? What's the information that the officers have got and can we see it? The answer is everything that we've got in this application is published on Planning Online. So if any of the members of the public, any of the members of the committee wish to see the information, it's all available on Planning Online. It is summarised within the report. So in terms of flood resilience and flood considerations, that's the lead local flood authority. If you look at, consult and consider applications, so their comment is on page 13 of the report, and the summary of their comments is on page 21, but effectively they raised no objection, and we're reimposing some conditions. In terms of ecology, SES and Natural England both raised no objection, which is set out on page 13. And then considered in the report in page 22 and 23. And in response to the balance in terms of what benefit the Cascading Wetland gave in terms of green infrastructure, biodiversity, that type of thing, that is the motivation behind the additional landscape condition that's going on at the end of the officer's report. In terms of the sustainable urban drainage system, There's two conditions to cover off that. So condition 9 is specifically for sustainable urban drainage, and condition 11 covers off the surface water drainage. From the statutory consultees, there is no objection in terms of risk of downstream flooding, which is something they would consider as part of a detailed application. There is a shadow habitats regulation assessment, as is required for the phosphate mitigation. Again, that is deemed to be acceptable. Natural England have raised no objection. Ecology have raised no objection. And with regards to the EA DEFRA environmental heat maps that were mentioned by one of the speakers, it does cover wetlands and ponds. So in terms of ponds, that would include the sustainable urban drainage systems that are coming forward. But as previously mentioned, this is effectively an outline application. So the actual detailed location and everything like that of the ponds would come later in terms of the research matters applications. And just to reiterate in terms of the appropriateness of the Section 73, Section 73 in sort of simple terms is an application to vary conditions. So the application seeks to vary or remove a specific condition on the original outline planning permission, which conditions the delivery of the cascading wetland. So it's the justification in terms of the information they've provided for an alternative strategy, which we've considered at length with the consultees, and with the benefit of the conditions that we are suggesting. Officers are putting the recommendation of sort of approval to members. I think only other point of clarification for the deed of variation. So the original outline planning permission has a legal agreement that sits with it that requires a number of obligations. One of those obligations is the cascading wetland feature. If we are approving today, which is down to members, the removal of that feature with the alternative strategy, that section of the 106 needs to come out. So the deed of variation is literally deletion of that section and replacement with the alternative source arrangements that are currently being proposed. So the deed of variation doesn't exclude or prohibit all the other obligations. All the other obligations still bite. It's just effectively removing the cascading wetland from the obligations. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. I mean, now move on to members' questions. And first one I see is
Thank you, Chair. I should explain that I am essentially my extent, I'm chair of the Somerset Rivers Authority, so deal with a lot of flooding, and I've had dealings with the Three Villages group on Mudford, aware of the situation there. I've got 5 questions, if you'll bear with me. Firstly, pumps. Was I right in understanding that the original proposal required the use of pumps and the amendment does not? So pumps would be removed. Thanks. Secondly, we're told that the reason for the change is all driven by changes in practice in dealing with phosphates. So was there any cost question there? In other words, I mean, the direct question, and you may not be able to answer this, is from the developer's point of view, is this change costing them more or less? Third question is on natural flood management. People be aware that it's a big drive now for natural flood management. Chunk of the 50 million we've been awarded by DEFRA flood resilience improvement is going to go on natural flood management. So to put the question simply, does this change increase the amount of natural flood management or decrease it or leave it the same? We're going to ask a fourth question on the schedule 7 of the deed of variation. Biodiversity net gain. It says that there has to be a minimum of 10, or well, it looks like it's been changed to 20% from 10 improvement in biodiversity net gain. So what was the figure on the original application? Was that going to produce 10% or 20%? So is this is this an improvement because we get 20% PNG rather than 10? And lastly, if we refuse this variation, what happens? Can it go to appeal? Thanks.
Thanks for all the questions, councillor. I'm just going to pick up on questions 3 and 4, so regarding flood management and your biodiversity net gain questions. So on flood management, your question was, does this change increase, decrease, or create the same flood management arrangement? I think the key point here is that flood risk management is achieved through the wider site and drainage strategy, and that was deemed to be acceptable. The cascading wetlands or the constructed treatment wetlands did provide some flow attenuation benefits. However, the drainage strategy was not reliant on them. So when the LLFA came to comment on this application, they didn't sustain an objection because the approved drainage strategy, is sufficient for the site. And like I said before, we can't compare it against the appeal scheme. And as for your question on biodiversity net gain, the figure on the original scheme was a 24% gain, and that was estimated in the environmental statements. The constructed treatment wetlands contributed, but the gain was actually delivered across the whole development through orchards, sustainable urban drainage strategy across the whole site, hedgerow, woodland planting, etc. In the section 73 proposal, the 24% gain is still achieved, and a new metric and biodiversity net gain strategy were submitted, and that includes the green infrastructure where the constructed treatment wetlands was, and we received no objection from ecology on BMG. Thank you.
Thank you. So, turning to the question, the first one, were pumps going to be used in constructed wetland? Yes, as you heard from the speaker, pumps aren't considered to be a sustainable way to be moving surface water around sites. In terms of changing the phosphate solution and cost, it does cost quite a lot of money to do engineering works to get cascading wetland features in. My understanding of the initial proposal was that it was achieving enough phosphates that it would result in surplus credits that the developer would then sell them onto the market. So in terms of cost versus what they'd get back from it, they were actually getting benefits back from the construction. But there's no requirement for developers to deliver over and above their own mitigation. When we're looking at planning applications, the assessment is always, can the development wash its own face in terms of does it mitigate its own impacts? Things have changed since the initial phosphates mandate in terms of preventing development. Credits cheaper, the ability to mitigate through on-site subs is accepted, and it's demonstrated through the information that it's provided that it can mitigate its own impacts. I don't believe it's providing the additional credits at this point, but it is mitigating its own impacts. In terms of the National Flood Management, to give you a bit of an easier answer, in terms of drainage strategies, they have to demonstrate that surface water runoff is no greater than greenfield runoff rates. So if this site were not developed, how much water would naturally flow into the waterways, and is after development, is that amount still the same amount or less? So in terms of mitigating on site, that's what they need to demonstrate to satisfy the lead local flood authority, and they are raising no objection on this application. We did also consult the Environment Agency, but they just commented saying this isn't within the remit of one of the applications they would normally comment on. So again, they've had the opportunity to review and comment on the application and haven't provided a comment on this site. In terms of the BMG, under new legislation, the requirement is 10%. So what we can require and put into 106 is normally 10%. The delivery on this site is going to be 20% within the 106, so minimum of 20%.
in 106, which is a 10% betterment beyond what we can normally require. So as part of the planning balance, that would weigh in favour of the development. And in terms of would there be the opportunity to appeal? Absolutely, it's a standalone decision that's determined on its own right. If the outcome of the application was a refusal, actually I'll do a caveat first. If the outcome, if the result of the recommendation of this committee was refusal because the scale of development is over 150 dwellings, what would have to happen first is there would have to be a consultation with the Secretary of State. So it goes to them to make sure we're making appropriate decisions before we can issue a refusal. Secretary of State can then decide to either call in the application for them to review and decide, or they can agree with committee members. But the question I always ask the committee is what evidence is there in terms of what concerns there are with the scheme, and what statutory constitutes sort of address or support those concerns. So hopefully that's all your questions.
Just have one follow-up check, which is Sandy. So if I understood the answer on if I understood the answer on natural flood management correctly, what's being proposed now achieve the same overall result in terms of flood protection, but it will be done with less natural forms of slowing the flow. Is that right? Or more concrete, less natural?
Or more natural and less pumps. Because SUDS is a sustainable urban drainage system, so they are like reed wetlands in ponds, but it's not a cascading feature at the top northland corner, but it will be areas of blue. So you can't see it very well, but there are areas of blue in the strategic master plan where there are sort of ponds proposed for the future phases, but it is a reserved matter which will come forward in the next lot of applications.
Lastly, Mr. Chairman, just let's remember that what we're told that the Lead Local Flood Authority gave an opinion. The Lead Local Flood Authority is us, Somerset Council.
Thank you. That's Councillor Osborne.
Chair, it's just a quick question and point of clarification. When I read the report, I understood that the cascade feature, the whatever it's called, the water cascade feature as a form of drainage, but this was a condition imposed by the inspector in order to make the development more acceptable in planning terms, in terms of landscape, and it was actually going to mitigate some of the fact that we were out of area. Can we just, which is what we appear to be doing, just overturn an inspector's imposed condition and put something else in? Do we have the right to do that? And also, is the proposed replacement, is that actually going to compensate for the perceived enhancing landscaping benefit that was put in by the inspectors to make the development actually acceptable in planning terms? So are we undermining inspector's recommendation? And do we have the right to do it?
Thank you. As the decision maker, we have every right to determine planning applications. What we need to do as decision maker is make sure we've taken into consideration all relevant policies, all relevant material considerations, consultative responses and circumstances of the site. So it is materially different from the appeal in that the appeal did provide a wetland. This scheme doesn't provide a wetland. What it provides instead is a sub-strategy that's been signed off as acceptable by all the statutory consultees. It provides alternative biodiversity, which again has been signed off by all of the statutory consultees. And on this slide in particular, the question we were asking is the same question we were asking in terms of if you take it away and it was a benefit, what do we get back? What's the benefit that we can attach some weight to? So that was where we've got this plan for in terms of its proposed layout of green
accessible space in the northern end of the site. It's not a cascade wetland, it's a green open space with paths, with landscaping. Condition 15 is requiring the detail of any reserve matters to reflect the landscape principles that have been set out. The landscape and placemaking officer notes the removal of the wetland and the cascading wetland and the sort of impact that this has in terms of landscape, character, biodiversity, but was satisfied with the landscape principles shown and subject to the condition being imposed. So we have looked at it, we have balanced it. It's not that we've just said, oh, we don't need that, taking it off is fine. It's looking at taking it off, what the impacts of taking it off were, then assessing what the proposal is in terms of its replacement and mitigation, and ultimately coming to the same way of exercise that the planning inspector did in terms of there is landscape harm as a result of this development for this site in this location. That was as was the original ES study application was supported by the inspector. The inspector considered that the wider benefits of housing delivery, affordable housing delivery, the landscape and biodiversity enhancements, which still exist but in a different form for this development, outweighed the harms that were previously identified in that balance. That balance and consideration is the same thing that officers have done before coming to you with a recommendation. But you can't just ignore a condition. You have to look at why it was imposed, what was important, and then what we're getting back and how that addresses the concerns that were raised.
So just to come back, you can change, amend, or abolish, for want of a better term, an inspector impose a condition. And the inspector clearly performed a weighted balance in terms of do the benefits of this outweigh the harms of that. When you came to evaluate the SOS as opposed to the benefits and the wider benefits of that wetland, which was imposed for a very specific reason by the inspector, what was the actual calculation you did? What is the sort of weightings you apportioned to each of those elements to arrive at the weightings, to arrive at the decision that you did? Because I can't see that in the report. And to be honest, with the greatest of respect, because there is public interest in this, we know that from the eloquence of the public speakers and the questions they have raised, that I think that would be very helpful to see is what is the calculation behind this, what is the weighting you ascribe to each of those things in order to reach the decision that you made.
Thank you. I think first and foremost, what I would say is that wetland, at the point the planning inspector was determining the application, was the phosphate mitigation. So insofar as importance, you cannot approve a development that doesn't mitigate its own phosphate impact. So the importance of providing the wetland requires the condition in terms of phosphate mitigation. In addition to that, within the inspector's decision, he did note then the wider immunity benefits in terms of having a nice open space that people can enjoy. He also noticed the biological enhancements as a result of having a nice green open space that people can enjoy, people would use on a recreational basis. In terms of phosphate mitigation, as you've heard through the presentation and just set out within the report, that is adequately accommodated through the SUDS and through alternative strategies, which have done a shadow HRA assessment to again check that it doesn't adversely impact on any designated areas. That's been approved by ecology and by natural england. So in terms of with the replacement strategy, it's being looked at in sort of 2 or 3 different elements. So is the phosphates adequately addressed through the alternative scheme? Yeah, an independent habitats regulations assessment that's been signed off. Is the biodiversity element being addressed through the development as a whole? The development as a whole last time had 24% biodiversity net gain. As a new application today, we can impose 10% biodiversity net gain, but obviously that would be a deficit relative to the consented scheme. We've got a minimum of 20%, which is 10% more than what we can impose on fresh applications today.
So again, obviously, that's by looking at that balance, that biodiversity enhancement is still in there with this being the view alternative strategy. Then the other point is, what about the loss of that space for a nice environment for people to walk around, enjoy, that type of thing? That's where we got to with the landscape principle and looking at what could we do with this space to make sure that, A, from a wider landscape perspective, we're not encouraging any development or further encroachment in this area in terms of built form or landscape impacts. So we're maintaining it as a green space. And the landscape principles are secured through condition 15. But landscape in and of itself is a reserved matter for future applications. But this sets a benchmark in terms of we are expecting this end of the site to provide high level, high amenity, enjoyable recreational space for future residents to use. On the balance of the development delivering all of those, we were satisfied that the removal of that condition and the replacement with SUDS was considered to be an acceptable outcome. So hence the recommendation to members.
Just to come back again, what you are losing is the water element, which you talk about, so I take it the less code in water. That is going to generate a different habitat to something that is dry and grassy. So is there any implications for gain or loss of biodiversity because you are taking out a significantly different type of habitat that's going to put that to enhance the landscape and the amenity in that potentially you could argue we've actually putting something slightly different and it's not just yet another open space. So what is the value of that?
Yeah.
And I'll leave it at that.
So I apologise, it's not very clear on the slide here, but the red box on that slide, if you can see it, if members are on the slideshow in the meeting, in the red box, there's two quite substantial pond wetland areas. Next to it, almost in the middle, you can see a slightly darker stripe. Again, that's another sort of wetland subs pond area. Can you go to the wider identity layout? Thank you. And so then again on this one, so the appeal one's on the left, the members, the section 73 one's on the right. There's a couple of large pond areas, sort of just down, you can see the first block of residential development and an open green space. That's due to a pond subs area, which then leads down that boundary again to that other space in between the development parcels. And the reserve matters for phase 1, which is just where the site access is. That's actually got detailed subs arrangements with it. But again, because layout and landscaping is part of reserved matters, these details will come through in full as part of the reserved matters. But in terms of what they've done with the subs arrangements, how they've laid out within the site, they are still providing that habitat, but not in one long cascade at the top of the site. They are sort of distributing it around the site.
May I follow on? May I just follow on? So I'd just like to add that in the appeal at Brief Scheme, so the constructive treatment wetlands did contribute to biodiversity net gain, but the gain was actually delivered across the whole development. As I said earlier, through orchards, suds across the whole site, hedgerows, woodland planting, etc. And now turning to the right to the section 73 before us, that 24% gain is still achieved, and that was demonstrated through a new submitted biodiversity metric and biodiversity net gain strategy, which have been reviewed and had an objection to. And that gain is also now delivered in the northwest area where the cascading wetlands were. So yeah, there was no objection from ecology in terms of biodiversity net gain. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, Chairman, those just so conditions 14 relating to because you're no longer having the wetland scale, you're removing the condition that puts in 150 metre barrier between anything happening and the actual wetland. So you avoid potential cross-contamination, compaction of ground. Sorry about that. And other matters. Just to sort of clarify and confirm, if that condition is removed, so you don't have that 150-metre barrier anymore, what is there to stop the applicant deciding we're going to slip some extra houses in?
Thank you. So the reason it's been raised particularly in terms of that condition wasn't put forward in this round of consultation on this application as a requirement. We think it originates from the wastewater treatment plant, which is off-site to the northwest of the development. And the wetland cascading ponds would have resulted in a lot of standing water in quite close proximity to a foul drainage treatment plant. So there was concern about flies and amenity levels, that type of thing. So the reason we flagged it for further consideration between ourselves and Wessex was to double check based on the site strategy that's being put forward now, whether Wessex still require this, because we think it's a conflict between the original cascading wetlands and wastewater treatment plant rather than the location of the ponds universally. So if it's not required or reasonably necessary in respect to the development, we shouldn't be imposing it in accordance with the tests. In terms of what stops the developer doing more, the illustrated plan sets out the development is the whole on the southern end of the site. There are parameter plans that look at built form envelopes, so there would be control through the parameter plans in terms of where they can put development. In the event that they want to start putting development to the north of the site, we would strongly encourage with them in this room to not do that. From a landscape perspective, they would have to put in another section 73. We would have to reconsider that in full and look at the revised impacts of that in that location. But the cap on the number is set out in the outline plan question, so it's 252. And specifically within the parameter plans, within the restrictive plans, all of the development is to the southern edge, and a lot of that is to address the wider needs. The top end of the site has been retained as a green and accessible amenity space.
Councillor Patrick.
Thank you. I need some help, I'm afraid. Not the first time online, but it's relation to two questions. Thank you. This is long for a bit too long, in fact. But we heard very eloquently, and I really enjoyed the trigger spirit. We heard very eloquently how this constructive treatment wetland is a contingent element of the appeal, without which this couldn't proceed to an approval under the planning inspectorate. I'm just not sure. I'd like some clarification on that, because I thought this was an outline that was approved as an appeal. I've been reading it avidly, and I cannot find in there that the constructive treatment wetland was the contingent requirement. All I can see is condition 9, which says that the constructive treatment wetland must come through as reserved matters. It can't be both. It can't be this application being approved by the inspector. Surely it can't be approval contingent on constructive treatment wetland, whilst also being yet to be approved. Does that question make sense?
Yeah. It does, and I'll come back to phosphates. So the benefits of a constructed treatment, wetland treatment cascade isn't limited to phosphates, but because it included phosphates and included the benefits of over provision of phosphates, therefore enabling the developer at a future point to sell it on as future credits for other schemes, it was noted as a particular benefit on this scheme. When we're determining any approval, if there is phosphate mitigation, we need to specifically secure that. And that was set out within the conditions by the inspector. They also referred to the in the environmental statement when they were looking at how you balance the harms versus benefits. So that's why, as part of this application, with section 73, if you grant section 73, it's a standalone fresh permission. We had them do an environmental statement addendum to say,
if you looked at all these areas, if you looked at all these harms and impacts, where you weighed the cascading wetland into those considerations, if you're taking that out and replacing it with the strategy you've now come forward for, how does that balance when you reconsider it again? And that's all part of the consideration that the inspector had when they made the decision, but also it's the consideration that we've gone through in looking at the environmental statement.
Okay, thank you. That answers my question. The second one is to be a little bit more contentious. Drill down on the LLFA. I don't think I've ever seen before the LLFA sustain no objection. I think it's important for members to recognise. But I think we also need to be clear on what it is we're deciding when this bit then to move into the debate. I've never seen the LLFA sustain no objection, but then write such a strongly worded consultation response. It's very, very strong. I think it needs to be read out to some degree. I'm not reading the whole thing. But it opens by saying we are incredibly disappointed to see the removal of this cascade feature, which includes wider benefits such as slower flow, etc., etc. Amenity biodiversity, we will discuss these things. And it goes on to then say, I'd like to highlight policy EQ1, all in capital letters. I think somebody was quite angry. And it says that this measure of the cascading water flow would improve flood resilience. Now, that's not clear in my head. I think this needs to be clarified for us all now on this committee, because we heard from Mr. Lawson earlier. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. When he said that this was a closed loop system and there were pumps involved. I hadn't appreciated that, in fact. And that concerns me because I want to know if this was a closed loop system that really an artificially created mechanical pump-driven water system, sort of something you might have in your garden. I want to know how on earth that is anything to do with slowing flow if surface water can't get to it. I think we need to have that clarified so we can make a defensible decision today. Thank you.
Thank you. So on that basis, they did raise an objection. There are conditions. The conditions do say no development shall commence until a detailed surface water drainage scheme based on sustainable drainage principles has been submitted to and approved in writing. Drainage strategy shall ensure that surface water runoff post-development is attenuated on site and discharged at a rate and volume no greater than greenfield runoff rates. So whatever happens runoff wise, it will be no worse, no greater, no bigger than if there was no development on the site and the water runoff was coming from the site naturally. The benefit, if you can look at it as a benefit, the benefit of having development on a site is that actually you can reduce the rate of the runoff to below the runoff rates, because you can channel surface water drainage into ponds, you can have them discharging through pipes, you can control the rate, and then depending on what the volume you're storing on site would depend how low you can get that rate to be. The requirement in terms of planning policy, in as far as we can push it, is we can ask them to match the existing situation. If there's a known site-specific flood risk issue, they also need to address that before they can get sign-off. And through the details of the condition, together they have ultimate responsibility for signing off the SUD strategy at the end of the day. In terms of how it would work with a closed loop cascading feature, I'm assuming that in the previous scheme, there may have been the ability to have attenuation flows. So if some of the surface water came down on site at certain volumes, they could have been directed to a closed loop system with the assumption that if you only direct a little bit at some point during hot weather, it evaporates, so you can feed it on overflow occasions. So if you're not needing to discharge the extent of the water, you could reduce the flows. From a pure surface water drainage strategy solution, yes, having as much surface water storage on site as possible is preferable for the LFA in terms of it would, naturally remove or reduce the amount of surface water going off and out of the site. But in terms of what we can control through planning and what we can control through planning, there's no objection to the scheme that's before the LFA, and they recommend these conditions, and it does everything that it should be doing from a planning policy perspective. So appreciate it's not necessarily, I think Rachel has alluded to this, if it was a beauty parade and you were putting the two against each other, the cascading water feature is lovely.
But in terms of if you're looking at the harms, the planning benefits, the material considerations, we still haven't got the 5-year land supply. It would still be a significant benefit in terms of delivery of housing. It would be a significant benefit in terms of delivery of affordable housing. When you're weighing everything in the balance, at the end of the day, the recognition for officers is approval.
So, Chair, if I may, just to be clear then, we're saying that essentially the LLFA believes that more is better, but that what is proposed is sufficient to deal with surface water. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for a very detailed report or series of very detailed responses. Just one particular thing that I'm interested in. Could you just maybe clarify or remind the committee, given that there are going to be 252 houses, presumably with a lot of children, are there any sort of health and safety risks regarding this new drainage provision? If so, are there some safeguards being put into place? Thank you.
I'm going to say no, because we wouldn't approve something that wasn't considered to be unsafe. The details of the ponds, the location of the depths, the fencing, any appropriate sort of lifeguard material if needed, or the depths as such, would all be controlled through future applications. So it's not something that members have them today, but it is something we would be strictly controlling through the process of the reserve matters.
Thank you. Councillor Messenger.
It's clear that from all the groups from Mudford that they feel they've been starved of information as to what is happening and everything they wanted stuff clarified. Is the officer happy that they've had sufficient opportunity and opportunities to answer these questions? The people of Mudford are kept under a lot of distress every year, several times a year with flooding, and they have every right to try and prevent any more of that happening to Mudford. Thank you.
Thank you. The Section 73 application was advertised twice to the public when it first went in, which was summer of 2025, I believe, and then again in March 2026 when the revised information came through. So new site notices were put up and a new publication in the local magazine. Thank you.
Councillor Patrick, you have an additional question?
Thank you. Just a very, very quick one. This is just a general question. It's not actually, well, it's related to this application. I'll just ask you. We've also got national scheme of delegation changes coming in October. And my question is in relation to when the reserve matters comes forward for this site. Where does it fall? Does it fall in Schedule 1 or 2? I think reserve matters fall in Schedule 1, which means they never come to committee. But I wonder if is there transitional arrangements or what's the view of officers?
The National Scheme of Delegation, for the members of the public that don't know, that there is a National Scheme of Delegation rolling out. It's coming into force on the 31st of October. It sets out the universal determination process for a range of applications and sizes of applications. So under Schedule 1 is all applications that are delegated to officers, so they would never be a planning committee, they would always be delegated to officers. And Schedule 2 sets out a list of applications that could come to committee that could be considered by the planning committee, subject to going through the gateway test. So getting the first sign with the lead member and the lead officer, so normally it's chair of the relevant area committee. Reserve matters always fall into Schedule 1, so they would be delegated to officers. The exception to that is what's defined in the National Scheme of Delegation as large outlines. So if you've got an outline of 500 or more, then the reserve matters for that would go through the gateway test and potentially be sent to Schedule 2. But anything less than 500 as a reserve matter will be for officers.
Thank you very much. I just think it's an important point to note because of the change of how members and how the public and parish councils may wish to engage or have to engage, not may wish with reserve matters if this were to go into which they then go to reserve matters.
Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the point of how what's being replaced would have looked. Because we would have been given the impression that it would have been rather pretty. But if you look at the map, there's the sewage works, and then immediately below it are these cascade ponds on the left-hand picture. If you look at the narrative statement put in by the designers, page 7, paragraph 4.3, it says, the only change to the proposals is the removal of man-made basins that formed a wetland proposal to deal with phosphates. The location of those foul basins was in part due to the proximity of the sewage treatment works. And then it talks about how the water had to be then pumped back up the hill. So my impression is that we would have had 3 ponds, of which the top one could potentially be quite smelly. I mean, I'm used to doing that. I did a lot of work for the World Bank on sewage treatment works in Africa in very hot weather where ponds like this were used. So I'm now getting the impression that actually what would have been put in would have not been particularly attractive from the point of view of the mental public, of the public, or of the new estate going past. Could you clarify that, please?
Unfortunately, I can't, without knowing the full detail of the drainage strategy for the outline appeal scheme, I can't confirm or deny your comments. The thing I will point out is we have done a comparison between the appeal scheme and section 73 for the benefit of members, so you understand what the consented position was versus what the application currently is. In terms of assessing the section 73 application, we cannot do the direct comparison between the appeal. We have to look at the section 73 on its own merits. Sorry.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you. Since the inspector's judgment, has there been any changes of legislation or advice in the way of handling the phosphate problem?
Not changes to legislation, but there has been, well, actually there has been a change to legislation in terms of the CG5 case, but that's not relevant for this application because it's still an outline application of effectively section 73 outline permission. What has changed is the sort of means and ability to mitigate phosphates. So at the very early stages, it was very difficult for people to mitigate phosphates, and they had to turn to their own design solutions. Things have improved. Calculations have been adjusted to accommodate for any emerging or up-to-date data. And the availability of credits has also enabled the release of quite a few sites. So our practice in terms of around phosphates and the ability to mitigate phosphates has changed. And there is a case that has changed our interpretation in terms of reserve matter discharge conditions, but not for untried conditions.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we've come to the end of the questions. We move to discussions between the committee members. Let's start with Councillor Messenger.
I think this decision should be deferred until Mudford Parish Council and the Free Village Group have had opportunities to scrutinise this to their satisfaction. It's only democratic and right, and that what they've had to put up with over the years of history with the flooding and everything in Mudford, they should be given this opportunity. So on that basis, I couldn't support this application unless they give Mudford a chance to review this. So if it could be deferred, I would very appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Stanton.
Yeah, I wouldn't oppose deferral if we vote on that first, but having heard all the evidence, for me, this turns on the pumps and the sewage works, that what was being proposed was going to be detrimental to the environment in the sense that there will be pumping being run, consuming power. could be switched off, supply could fail. And so it's a plug system, and plug systems are terribly satisfactory if they're avoidable. And it was a series of basins, with a dirty top basin and a clean bottom basin, and one in between. So I think on balance, if we move to a vote on whether to approve this application, section 73 amendment, I think I would support it.
Thank you. Councillor Patrick.
Thank you, Chair. Having heard rather lengthy technical discussion and having had my concerns addressed, I think I would agree with Councillor Stanton that I was concerned about flooding, and I'm reassured that such as proposed would be a betterment, and the BNG is 20%, double what is required. And actually, looking at this case, I think the proposal is an improvement. I think I'll tell you why. Introducing mechanical pumps like that to create an artificial wetland is a bad thing. It's got a higher carbon footprint than suds, which is reedbeds and ponds, attenuation ponds, for example. I think that I am concerned about the changes to the landscape there. I accept that a natural water feature cascading down here that's not natural would look beautiful, like it would in anyone's private garden. But I am reassured and content with the new condition to make sure that we can, at reserve matter stage, ensure that the landscape-led approach is maintained in that area. So I think on balance that I would support approving this application. Thank you.
Any more discussions there?
Chairman, I'm speaking as a ward member, and because it's been mentioned highways and it's been mentioned section 106, I just really want to remind people of a development that's half a mile away, over 10, 15 years ago. The section 106 agreement was signed and still waiting, it's still not being carried out. But this is only half a mile on this development on the road up towards Cooper Street Lane. You've probably all forgotten this agreement. I know it's not, I know we can only vote on what's in front of us, and I agree with that, but I just need to remind everybody, section 106, on one hand is a legal document, but when it's served, it can be changed and ignored, and I'm just afraid as a ward member about the amount of traffic going round the road. Where you got the Primrose, someone help me, Primrose development going in. We've got this section 106 of Wyndham Park, that's still not gone in, and we've now got Law Homes. I'm not against none of it, I'm not for any of it. I'm just saying that there's a bit of a mess at the moment, the roads around the Oval. And I know we're going to do this application, but I didn't want to remind everybody about what you have all agreed in the past 15 odd years ago, what still has not been carried out. And we're mentioning these things now. We're going to be voting on section 106 of the possibility with a deed variation. I'm just a little just, so say it's a terrible, but I'm just informing everybody. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Well, we have two members who sounds like they're supporting it. Do we have a proposal from our review? Sorry, my apologies. Don't do. Yeah.
Sorry, it was just to provide a little bit of clarification. We've on a couple of comments that have been received. So one of them was about whether the parish or town councils had sufficient time to look at, review and comment on the application. So as Rachel set out earlier, there was the initial consultation when the application came in the summer last year. There was a re-consultation in March this year. So it has been advertised twice. It's gone out for public consultation twice. All of the information is available on the public online file. So just as a bit of caution, I think, for members, if you were looking to defer to allow further time, my question back to you would be, for what, in terms of, we've done the advertising, we've done the consultation, the information is on the online farm and it's publicly available. In terms of the latest comment, in terms of the 106, that's agreed and signed up for as part of the outline planning permission stays. So that's been agreed. The access arrangement was agreed as part of the appeal. None of that is changing through the section 73. The deed of variation is a technical term that says if you're changing a bit of the original 106, the bit we're changing is just the bit that refers specifically to the cascading wetland as phosphate mitigation. It's that bit that's coming out to be replaced with subs. So just for clarity will comfort the members, the home element, the access, that's all signed sealed through the original 106, and we'd still like for this application. And I think, as you heard from the speakers, we've actually got the developer who's got the reserved matters for phase one already in, they're championing a bit to start on site. So, you know, they are committed to delivery, and that will include the obligations on the 106.
Okay, I'll go back to my turn. Would either of you, does anyone come forward with a proposal?
Well, I thought Kevin proposed deferral before I gave my opinion, but I don't know if you've got a seconder.
All right, so we need a seconder.
Well, if there is a second, I just think we have to deal with the deferral proposal first.
Okay, so we have to do with the proposal to defer first. So that would require a seconder. So no seconders come forward for that proposal. So we're looking for another proposal.
Okay, I do this with a heavy heart because I'm very sympathetic to the three villages from Mudford and all the complex situations like developments there. But I'm going to propose that we approve the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second it.
Okay, so we come to a vote on this.
Sorry, it's just a really quick one, just to confirm that that includes the recommendation on the, I think, first or second slide of the presentation about the condition that we're still discussing with Y6. So it's subject to change or removal of that condition depending on those discussions.
Can you just remind us what this specific from?
It's condition 14. Which I don't think second and we get for you. So condition 14 says no dwellings should be located within 150 metres of any permanently wet pond or subs features located within the subs and surface water drainage feature area that's identified on the parameter plan. On the original outline planning permission, this actually was exclusively the northern element of the site. So we think this condition is no longer required if their concerns were solely related to cascade. But we were asking for a bit more time to allow us to figure that out. So if it's not required, we would be removing it. If it is required, we would keep it in because it would still be relevant then to the elsewhere within the site.
Is that acceptable with that condition in? The proposal.
Yes, we have to vote on half thing. In fact, we'd be approving unknown with a high expectation that it will be okay.
So,
thank you, Chairman. The reason I didn't come forward to support you with a deferral is I don't think there's enough meat on the bones to justify it. Precisely is the information we're going to be asking for that isn't already in front of us, that hasn't already been explained and hasn't already been discussed. However, there is the point around condition 14, and I did raise that as a question, that if that band was removed, could the applicant increase the number of houses, or what would we then do with that particular land if it's no longer needed for safeguarding water quality and obviously environmental safety? So if you haven't figured it out, I think you might want to leave that in. Was that part of your proposal that you have everything, or you would propose and retain addition 14? Because if you haven't had time to work out the qualifications, it may be better to keep it there.
Thank you. So for confirmation, the recommendation today will be a recommendation. We still have to complete the legal agreement, which is the deed variation before we can issue. So the recommendation was, subject to the conditions that are listed, with the caveat that we are still working with Wessex in terms of whether condition 14 is needed. So if it's not needed, we would remove it. If it is needed, it stays in. But ultimately that discussion would conclude before we issue the decision notice with the deed of variation, but we can't issue anything until the deed of variation is complete. So the recommendation that's being sought from committee is a resolution to grant, subject to the deed of variation being completed and discussions concluding on condition 14. In terms of the concerns you were raising, Councillor Osborne, the restriction on the development is set out in the description of development of 252 dwellings, so it can't be more than that. And condition 15 specifically controls landscaping in the northern element of the site, which is where this originated from. So again, that's covered.
Just to also add, if I may, the parameter plans secured through this do protect that area in the northwest for green infrastructure, so no development parcels can be placed there, and that would need another section 73 application if that were to be changed. However, as Dawn said, the overall number of dwellings is set in the description of development, so that couldn't be changed under any forthcoming section 73 application.
Okay, so we have a proposal, seconded on the table now. I think we should move to a vote. Those in favour?
Five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me start again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, including the chair.
Of course, can Do I have a hands and show hands of who's against?
1, 2, 3, 3 against.
And abstentions?
There'll be 1 abstention, yeah.
There's a 10-minute break, and so I'd like people to leave for supporting this and other personal business.
Yes.
Okay, well, it's item number 6. It's 25/02726. House, land off Broadway Hills, 14 minutes. And first to speak will be the planning officer, Tim Marsh.
Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody hear me okay?
You do.
Yeah, this is a planning application, an outline planning application for up to 150 dwellings on land off Broadway Hill, Horton. Sorry about that. Members may recall that at the meeting on the 16th of June, they resolved to defer the application for 5 reasons. And those 5 reasons are covered in the update report, which together with the visual report, which is appended. The 5 issues that require reporting back are firstly, scrutiny on the needs of educational contributions, estimation of public transport availability, a further explanation of local services an explanation on the location and accessibility to the school, including active travel, and further clarity on the differentiation between Hook and Broadway as set out. There are corrections which were reported to you before on the main application of Appendix A. I won't go through them in detail, but just to remind you that it does need to be updated. So briefly then, paragraph 2.7, the total contributions are 346,000. And then the last bullet should not refer to education contributions, as you're aware, to the update report. Paragraph 3.1, affordable housing should be indistinct in the local market housing. Paragraph 6.2, regard to the septic tanks, should be diverted rather than decommissioned. And paragraph 9.1, updated to electric. Reflect the latest condition with the local plan, updated local plan changes.
I can't hear, I'm really low.
Is that better?
Close second.
That's better.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just do the updates. And then lastly, conditions 5 and 13, there is a revised access plan, now revision F. So this is the application site outlined in red in the usual way. You can see it lies to the north of the A303 and south of Horton, and then the western boundary is a watercourse. This is the aerial photograph. You can see from this it comprises a number of fields with existing hedge field boundaries which are largely retained. Topography of the site is shown on this plan, which, as you can see, slopes down to the east and to the west, with the highest part of the site flattest in the centre. This is a plan which is included with your update report, which shows the active travel routes to the various facilities in Horton and in Broadway, with the blue line indicating the parish boundary. So the various coloured lines are, firstly, the purple line is from the site in the bottom corner outlined in red to the north of Village Hall. And then the blue line is the 5 dials in the centre of Horton. The yellow line is to the school, primary school, and the orange line is to the medical centre. And then this table is also included in your report. I just summarise outlining the walking times and distances to those various facilities. But obviously, the important Village Hall being the closest facility and the 5 dials in Horton, but the other 3 being within Broadway, which actually is a significantly further distance to travel. The application is an outline that includes parameter plans which would form part of the planning permission. So the colours on this plan are the front colour is the proposed areas for housing, the access in grey. The green areas are public open space and landscaping. The dark green is existing planting and, as I said, on site to be retained. The blue areas are drainage features. The purple star is a pumping station. The orange star is a substation. The access is coming in from Broadway Hill on the north-eastern side of the site. And then there are pedestrian connections in the south-eastern playing field. The other parameter plan shows the building height, in predominantly up to 2 stories in the pale blue, with the central part of the site up to 2.5 stories. This is an illustrative layout plan based on those parameter plans. So there are a number of points highlighted on the plan, which I won't go through every one, but the key points to point out are the central locally equipped area to play, which is number 4, the provision for positive expansion of the Horton playing field, which is number 7. The provision of the subspecies are outlined in blue, 3 adjacent to existing watercourse, and then 1 in the centre of the site. This is the drainage tract included with the application. The larger arrow showing the exceedance flowed in the event of an extreme flood event going along the road into the attenuation ponds, which are outlined in blue and green. This is the road of access, which will form part of the permission to not reserve. The new junction you can see from the lower plan includes the new footway provision, which will require a crossing over of the Broadway Hill, the yellow hatching, and then a connection to the village hall and then on to the existing footways on the the western side of the. But just a number of photographs here. These are the positions in which they were taken. The upper three are sort of in the central western part of the site. You can see the watercourse that I mentioned earlier in photos 2 and 3. Then 4, 5 and 6 are looking into the site from the northeast. This is a Google Street View where the proposed access will enter into the site. And then I'm going to take you just through a series of Google images, street view of the roads. You can obviously the A303 and the junction with Broadway Hill heading in east. So again, a bit further up Broadway Hill, you can see the site behind the trees. It's the green field opposed to the lighter coloured field. So that's you can see from that sort of the topography I referred to earlier. This is entering into Horton with the access proposed access point just behind. And I've included these photographs in light of the members concerned in the previous meeting with regard to the European travel routes to illustrate the provision of the footway. So the new footway on the top left photograph will be provided by the developer to link in with the existing footway, which is this one is on the western side, then has to cross to the eastern side and approaches into the village. And then on Goose Lane, there at the top of Goose Lane, there aren't any dedicated footway, but then the footway resumes fairly soon after that junction. And then there are a series of points along the route where it's necessary to cross over. There's no footway in the point of the road where it dips down and is the gap between Horton and Broadway, which is there. You can see the cyclist, and then it resumes, and much like the earlier on Goose Lane, crosses a couple of times before reaching Broadway Road. And then these are the photographs of the provision for footway up to the Roche School. So in summary, this is an outline application with 2 parameter plans for the landscaping and layout and the building height. It is for up to 150 homes with 35% policy compliant affordable housing, a significant amount of on-site equipped play space, and significant off-site contributions towards youth facilities, training pitches and changing rooms, and a substantial primary care contribution. As set out in the main report, the key considerations are first of the physical development, obviously the importance of the paragraph 11P of the NPPF and the unfortunately we don't have a 5-year supply, and therefore the policy development plan don't carry the way that we would prefer to have. In an ideal world, we want some of this to be allocated. Unfortunately, they don't have a 5-year supply, so sites like this are in favour of development. In terms of the quantum and scale of development, I've outlined those to you in the report. Residential amenity, other than to mention that there's sufficient space within the site and the parameters to indicate adequate levels of residential amenity can be provided for existing and new residents. In terms of ecology and biodiversity, there will be substantial biodiversity net gains well above the 10% requirement. Highway safe and active travel, something that members are very concerned about. The highway officer is satisfied that a satisfactory level of highway safety can be achieved and that the new junction arrangements are acceptable and they're subject to the provision of the conditions recommended under a travel plan. I've outlined the position with regard to active travel. In terms of infrastructure, there will be a contribution towards infrastructure, and for the reasons explained in the update report, an education contribution is not required. There's a comprehensive drainage strategy and flood risk assessment, and I believe local flood authority are happy with the proposals for drainage subject to the conditions. Similarly, with phosphates, naturally, and our phosphates team confirm that the mitigation strategy is appropriate and acceptable and the appropriate assessment is passed. In terms of sustainability, there will be a condition recommended to secure the technologies for securing energy efficiency. So the recommendation is should be granted, subject to the prior completion of Section 106 agreement and the conditions set out in the report Appendix A. Just also to seek delegation for approval to minor amendments to the conditions and the Section 106 agreement, etc. And lastly, to refuse the application if the application fails to engage, respond, and progress the 106 agreement within 6 months. And then lastly, to highlight as this proposal relates to 150 dwellings or more, in the event the committee is minded to refuse it, then under the Town Country Planning Act Amendment 2026, the application will need to be referred to the Secretary of State and could be subject to recalling decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to public speaking, and I'm sure the first speaker, James Weatherall. Have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ross. As a resident of Horton, I'm concerned with the acquisition of 150 houses and the impact of infrastructure it will have, particularly alongside the many other approved and proposed developments in this area. To agree with the Planning Office's recommendation and we feel short-sighted, we have not seen the full impact of recent agreed housing developments in the area, many of which have still not been occupied or completed. Or understanding those risks could cause significant and irreversible harm to the character, function and the sustainability and activity. The proposed site is 1.1 to 1.3 miles from the road school. While this is considered a walkable distance, children cannot travel safely via the nearest pedestrian route. There are significant gaps in footways, many crossing points, one of which is a 5-point junction, parked vehicles and increasing traffic on roads that were never designed for major housing growth. Somerset School's transport policy would be obliged to carry out an assessment for those children walking to Norwich School, and it's likely they would all become eligible for free transport, and that would be taxis. As in other villages, this has happened, such as Coombe St Nicholas. This would generate even more vehicle movements in a village that has been described in parish records for Broadway as parked car chaos and gridlocked. This is particularly concerning given that Horton and Broadway already experience significant traffic from commuters using the village as a rat run to Taunton and in regular diversion routes that are weekly at least from the A303 and the A358. The mention of pupils with SEND is ambiguous. The report suggests that this development may generate only one additional SEND pupil. However, Norwich has currently 13% identified SEND children. Apply that to 150 homes, that would be considerably more children requiring support from education and particularly Norwich, and in later life perhaps for specialist school transport to come into village. For this number, we predict that there's probably around 19 based on one child per household. Norwich School is already close to capacity and remains popular with families from outside the catchment area and has over 120 pupils already travelling into this village. When local places become unavailable, children will need to travel elsewhere, increasing transport pressures and reducing the sustainability of the development. With 3 other developments soon to be completed, we have yet to see what that brings to Norwich and surrounding schools. This is already around recognised poor early years provision in an area and a lack of wraparound care so parents can work. Bus stops exist, but the services are limited. A handful of basic German each day is not realistic to private car use, alternative to private car use, and residents will be dependent on cars for employment, education, healthcare and shopping. This does not support the principles of sustainable development. Noise pollution, traffic and the infrastructure remains real concerns. Horton Broadway already absorbed the additional traffic, as I've said, with accidents. Local experience shows congestion.
Please summarise now.
Yeah, shows congestion and increased dramatically with closures. I just want to raise section 106. I am not satisfied that there is clear written evidence that education don't want the money because it's done in an internal meeting and there are no public records around that. The playing field option is not what the village needs.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Now, can I call Mark Wilkins?
Thank you, Chairman, councillors. What a delight it is to be back with you in just over 4 weeks from the last time we sat here. May I again highlight that 60 houses have already been passed in Horton over 3 sites, with this ridiculous application adding a further 150 houses. I wish to highlight some very critical numbers that 210 new houses would bring to Horton. All seem to be very conveniently overlooked. The total number of new residents would be 495. Would bring a total number of vehicles in 294, using UK national averages. Since 2021 census, this represents a staggering growth of 59%. 2 other sites have been identified, which will take it over 59%. Then add the 70 new houses passed through planning for the adjacent Broadway. The grand total is 288 new houses, over 10 sites, 9 of them greenfields, all within 1.6 miles of each other. 677 new residents, 403 new vehicles. Let me do some maths for you. If we take an average price of £400,000 per home, times that by 288, that is £115 million worth of housing in 2 tiny villages. Oh, so how much money will be invested from that money in our depreciating roads, single track bridges and lack of safe payments? Well, money to provide the roads flooding or icing over in the winter. How much money will go towards education? And most importantly, how much money will go to SEND? Let's look at the developer's trump card, affordable housing. There's not a single person in this room who believes Gleeson will produce 35% affordable housing, as they will use every trick in the book to avoid this level of commitment, in an effort to inflate the price, to use their own words on their corporate video, sell the development to the highest bidder. So Gleeson will not even be responsible for everything they agree in this room today. Somerset Planning will do absolutely nothing to hold them accountable. It's a despicable game of smoke and mirrors. The next cherry on the cake is 106 monies. Try telling that. I'm a resident of Broadway and a supporter of the cricket club. We're still waiting for £35,000 from a development that was completed 5 years ago. I ask the councillors present to fully reject this appalling, factually empty, poorly prepared application on behalf of the residents of Broadway and Broadway, and not give in to an ailing Sheffield-based PLC and their shareholders. This is about families and the rural communities of both villages, which should not be bullied for the sake of a tick box exercise on the planning officer's laptop. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I'll call on Sue Neve.
Good morning. I'm speaking as a resident of Horton. These are my thoughts on the proposed development. The local infrastructure will be unable to cope with a large increase in inhabitants. This is a rural area. There are already a number of infill sites either under construction or with planning permission. This is agricultural land, not a brownfield site. What thought has been given to local wildlife and biodiversity, including birds, bats, bees, and other insects? Surely building 150 houses here is contra planning policy, or is the adopted local plan 2006 to 2028 no longer being adhered to? The local plan includes policies to manage the levels of growth within rural settlements, and the development scale is commensurate with the range of services and facilities that are available. There is virtually no public transport in the villages of Broadway. There is a reliance on cars, which would increase traffic on narrow roads with few footpaths. This will be further exacerbated by the limited capacity of early years provision, meaning more car journeys to access facilities in the wider area. This must surely have an impact on highway safety. And we all know the chaos caused by problems on the A358, the A303 and the Ilminster bypass, particularly during silly season of the summer holidays, when the traffic really increases and then there are more traffic incidents, bringing traffic through the villages of Broadway and Horton. There is poor natural drainage in this area. To avoid causing further problems with flooding from introducing additional surface runoff from a housing development, an appropriate level of sustainable urban drainage would need to be designed into the development. The engineering works would probably require stormwater retention tanks and upgraded sewers, including the receiving sewer, not just the local one, who will pay for the ongoing costs of such a scheme. The development will have a new access road, who will be paying for any ongoing maintenance. The developer is also proposing a potential expansion of Horton playing field. Who would be responsible for ongoing upkeep of such a facility and who would be paying for it? What about delivery of strategic community infrastructure, i.e. education contributions, public transport, village halls, etc.? How much will Gleesons be asked to pay? Let's not forget that the developer of 16 houses in 2016 in Broadway was required to make financial contribution towards facilities within the village and those used in the wider area. And I believe the developer still owes £35,000. So these are empty promises of money coming. Housing growth should be linked to population growth, as well as employment opportunities. All this development will do is increase traffic to employment hubs and will do little to support the local communities. I'm concerned that Gleeson's vision for this area is not appropriate and unjustified in terms of economic, social and environmental impact. Has sufficient consideration been given to issues of agricultural land value, topography, landscape, flood risk, biodiversity and highways impact? This development will certainly not maintain or enhance the character of the area in any way. Additional housing growth needs to be balanced with employment growth. Otherwise, the area becomes a dormitory village with work and shopping taking place elsewhere, creating heavier traffic on country roads. I urge you to refuse planning for this application. Thank you.
Next speaker is David Ward.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Oh, sorry. Okay, my name is Nick Ward, I'm President of Horton for the last 10 years, obviously speaking to object this application. It's not a small extension to a village. This is a major development in a small rural settlement that's simply not equipped to accommodate it. Since 2020, there have already been several developments granted plan permission in Horton, totaling over 65 new houses, adding a predicted 200 people to the village population. The 2021 census was 821 people in the village. Therefore, this additional 200 equates to a 25% increase already. Together, this proposal is extraordinary. Based on normal occupancy levels, 150 homes bring between 450 to 600 people to the village. And that's not including the townhouses in the central development. I don't know why a townhouse would be built in Horton. For argument's sake, we take the lower amount of 450 people, and add it to the already approved plan, and we equate to 650 people, a 75% increase in the population of Horton. This is not sustainable. This doesn't take into account developments in the neighbouring village of Broadway. I believe there's still confusion and distinction between Horton and neighbouring Broadway. They are separate villages with separate parish councils, pubs, churches and village halls. With the response to section 5, the council has stated that both villages can be treated as single settlement in planning terms due to geography. If this is the case, the developments already put into plan permission in Broadway should be assessed alongside those in Horton. Broadway has already had planning for 72 houses approved since 2015, with a further 45 outbound application stage. a total of 117. 117 combined reports and 65 have already been granted, gives 182 houses within 2 small villages. Granting this additional 150 houses makes the total a ridiculous 332 new homes. This is not sustainable. Really, on points of the last committee meeting, there's no pavement or safe pathway to access the Rishore or where the development and fast crossing was the old A303. And there's 5 roads coming together, which are always busy and it's not safe. Anyone knows the village. This is again, the suggestion from the local education authority that there only send 1 or 2 pupils with special educational needs. It's obviously shocking. We all know that's not true. Public transport is almost non-existent. The maid service to Taunton, which would probably be a place you're going to be commuting if you're going to be living here, runs once daily, and you have to request the bus driver to stop in Horton. This is greenfield agricultural land that forms part of Horton of rural setting. Once lost, that landscape cannot be recreated. Policies 2 and 3 require development to respect local character and protect the natural environment. A large suburban style estate in this location will fail those tests. We all know that the Council of Housing targets to meet, however, this will not be the last application the Council receives. In the coming months and years, the Council will receive applications that are far more sustainable and actually meet local planning policy, and at the same time meet the housing demand. Finally, there was concern at the last meeting regarding changing law and the ability of the Secretary of State to call in applications and grant permission, even if the committee today refused the planning. It is my opinion this is why even more important now that the Council here today make a stand against the destruction of our countryside and our greenbelt land, as well as our historic villages where planning policies are clearly not met. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I have 2 speakers from local parish councils, starting with Amanda Mockridge. Oh, my apologies. I skipped one. You didn't say that. My profound apologies. Please go. Please take a seat.
As before I start, I didn't realise until I wrote it this morning that I was unable to show these pictures round. It is very important to me. May my daughter just stand with them, please, and let people see from the distance, because it is really relevant for the situation.
I'm afraid I don't think we can accept pictures at this point. Yes, they have to be submitted beforehand. I do apologise, but that's the way the process works.
Right, so, and I may at each point just to open that, and obviously you've got a good eyesight to see it, but it does prove the situation. Thank you.
You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. I live in Pottery Road and have lived here for 38 years. Behind us is a bungalow which my daughter lived in. On the 8th of December 2008 at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was awoken by a frantic call saying that my daughter's house was flooded. We rushed over to her home and immediately started to rescue furniture. Unfortunately, due to the depth of the floodwater, which was then 12 to 14 inches, the entire contents were damaged and unable to be saved. Our neighbours behind us also had water in their house, and other neighbours along Pottery Road had their gardens flooded. Some had time to dig channels to prevent property flooding, but it really did have a big impact on people. On investigation, it was found that due to the rainfall, excessive water had rushed down from the playing field and the field beyond where the new houses are proposed. In the playing field that backs onto Pottery Road, there is a ditch which collects the runoff from the field. When we have a storm, the runoff collects in the ditch behind the houses. We are at the end of the run, hence it cannot cope with the quantity of water causing flooding. A group of locals, I believe once a year, litter pick to assist the ditch's flow. In the field adjacent to the playing field, there was once a pond, which acted as a storm reservoir. This has subsequently been filled in, and since then more flooding has occurred. And that I know I'm not supposed to, but I've just shown you. This is people's gardens, the back of their gardens which are flooded. My concerns are that more properties will add to the quantity of runoff and increase our risk of flooding, especially with the worsening climate change, with summers getting hotter, giving us tropical storms and winters getting wetter. My other concern is that if the water goes in the other direction, it's going to worsen the flooding of the River Ding, the river that runs through Broadway. On October the 21st, the owner, October the 21st, year to the 21st, the owner of Abbotsford was flooded to such a degree that to reinstate his home, the cost was 300,000. Having spoken to him, Dove Lane has flooded every year since, and he and we feel any additional building could have an adverse effect on the River Ding. I do, however, and that is pictures of flooding, and I'll put it up again. I do, however, have a flood risk survey from the government, and this is the flood risk survey. I do, however, and it's from the government flood risk website stating the risk of flooding at Abbotsford. This is the house I've just spoken about that had £300,000 worth of damage to reinstate it. That the risk is very low. It goes from low to low, from very low to medium to high. And they maintain that up until 2060, it will still be very low. And yet, having seen this picture here, someone went to that building at 3 in the morning. And at that point, the water had come out into the road, and it was to a depth of about a foot. Unfortunately, it was felt that it was too bad to drive the car through. So because of this.
You've had now 4 minutes.
Oh, sorry, I'll finish it now, and I will finish it. But the time he came round, it had gone up to about 2'6". But what I did want to say was last year, a number of
Sorry, I can't take any more now. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for your time. I do feel, to be fair, that was rather short when I heard others speaking. I've literally got 2 more lines to read. But I please have the opportunity to do so, please.
No, I'm sorry, that was over 4 minutes. I did allow other speakers to go over 3 minutes by up to 30 seconds, but you've been by far the longest speaker here now. Can I have Amanda Mockridge?
Thanks, Liz. Thank you. Members, I'd just like to remind you to please disregard any photographs. I know it might seem difficult, but we need to follow the same process that we follow for everybody else, and that information is publicised on the website. So if you could just follow that and make sure that we're making a safe decision, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Hi, I am Amanda Mockridge and a member of Horsham Parish County Court. We oppose this development. I have lived in Horsham for 43 years, and my family centuries beforehand. Education. Naroche School is full. Do the village children get priority because of all the extra housing, or do they need to do transport elsewhere? Walking to Naroche using existing pavements means you need to cross the road 14 times, not including driveways. On this route, there are 4 stretches of road and a narrow bridge that have no pavement. In these areas, there are parked cars, which means that you need to walk around them into the middle of the road. Now, in Tim's photos, you saw 2 pictures with cars parked on a junction and the kids have to walk into that road. Would you want your children, grandchildren in danger, risking their lives? They say it takes 18 minutes to walk to school. Actually, with young children, it takes 25 to 35 minutes. In the winter, people tend to drive to school because of the icy and wet conditions. None of these roads are gritted. During drop-off and pick-up times, Naroche is a nightmare for everyone. It's practically impossible to pass the road at these times. We're amazed that there hasn't been any accidents. Public transport, sorry, but this is the truth. The S1 to Ilminster is actually only once at 9:15 and returns 2 hours later, except on Tuesdays and Thursdays when you have a second return. The 98,
to Taunton and Colleges leaves Horton at 7:24 and returns at 6:18. There is an extra return at 5:40, but only during term time. The number 30 operates from Ilminster. Its nearest stop is Station Road, which is a 2.4-mile walk, crossing Southfields roundabout. If you wanted to cross that and risk your life, you're mad. We need to also point out the bus stops are located outside the 5 Dials on Hanning Road, not in a lay-by as stated. This is an intersection of 5 roads and makes visibility difficult for all users and pedestrians. The junction is heavily used for what is called the Ratland to Taunton, and these are the back roads used by local towns and villages to avoid the A358 and the A303 Eagle Cross at commuter and summer times. It's also a diversion route when there are accidents on either of these roads. This development, if passed along with the other ones, will add 290 plus vehicles into our village. And I would like to say we are above the national average, because if we have children over the age of 17, they have cars as well. So most villagers have 3 cars per household. Because of it, we have 1,200 cars going along Hanning Road to come out of the village and 1,200 coming in. If you add the amount of cars that you're adding to our village, that is another 400 cars.
It's when you summarise and finish. Thank you.
We oppose this because of that reason. It is dangerous for the villagers and children. Thank you.
Stephen Leet.
Okay, good morning, and I've changed it, so good afternoon, Chair and Committee. I want to contextualise some of the comments in terms of Horton and Broadway, in terms of the local plan, perhaps some numbers that you haven't heard this morning. I know you've heard a lot. I've actually deleted some. Horton and Broadway are defined as rural settlements, so we're not a village, we're a rural settlement, and that's tier 1 on the hierarchy apparently. The parish boundary is the River Dean, which is bridged at Goose Lane on the plan that you've already seen. Now they combine the 2 rural settlements for local planning purposes. So we become a village for the local plan, which anticipated 1314 dwellings being delivered by villages or combined rural settlements, and that equated to 60 houses per village, so simply 30 from Broadway and 30 from Horton. Now that's under the local plan SS5. Now growth should be strictly controlled, and the development is expected to be commensurate with the scale and character of the settlement and the tier in the hierarchy. Remember 1. Horton and Broadway will have delivered 134 houses by 2028, well over the village plan number. And should this development be approved, this will deliver 207 dwellings, commensurate with the local plan housing requirements for a higher tier rural centre, with example, Bruton, Martock, Petherton. Okay, these rural centres have shops, they have buses, there's connectivity. We have 1 shop, and there's a little bit more I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, the proposed development on Broadway Hill will only create a large car-centric estate, significantly impacting on the resources shared with Broadway. The effect of continued urbanisation of the 2 settlements should not be underestimated. Horton shares amenities with Broadway. The development will create unacceptable pressure on existing services and facilities. The school has been mentioned, 207 up to capacity. I'm very surprised that there is no education money. I've come from an education background, 40 odd years, never met this. Always seen education money. So I am bemused by it. And the secondary school pupils will have to be going to Holyrood, which is in Chard, which I believe is at 1,400 and near capacity. And that's before all the new Chard and Ilminster settlement come into that. So more traffic, whichever way you look at it, for the children. Now, nobody's mentioned the Churchview Medical Centre. That is the furthest point on that walk-in map you were shown. It has a stated capacity of 4,000. It's already over 400 beyond its stated capacity. The surgery list has an impact on primary care. Waiting times have increased this is regularly commented on by the Broadway residents and the Horton residents in planning objections. Planned development will take this figure to 700 over capacity. Now, I did have a little test. I rang them this week and tried to make an appointment. My appointment time was over 4 weeks. I don't think that's satisfactory. That's third world national health. So if this plan and objection went through, there'd be over 1,000 extra places needed in that medical centre. Now, I will mention, just to finish, the active travel and connectivity. I think the transport plan, the active transport plan, is amazing. It cannot be delivered. I'm sorry, it cannot be delivered. The pathways through the village are not connected. We don't have cycles really, because the children will get knocked off, because the roads are less than 5 metres wide. We don't have continuous pavements.
If you could summarise.
So, okay, there's not a safe route to school, to the medical centre for pedestrians and vulnerable people. And that's already been shown by the highways report for the 45 houses that was turned down in Broadway earlier this year. Highways commented on that. So that's it, thank you. But I will say, in 2022, this committee refused planning for 50 houses in Horton because of the saturation of the amenities. I think you made a great decision then. Thank you.
Next, I have Mr. James from Nexus Planning.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you again with respect to this planning application. We are pleased to note that the officer's report provides clarity in response to the points raised at the previous committee meeting. With respect to education, the local education authority's position is clear that there is sufficient capacity within the school planning area to accommodate the pupils from this development alongside improved developments within Horton and Broadway. This means there is no need to secure financial contributions towards education. Bus stops are located in close proximity of the site, enabling future residents to access nearby settlements, notably Ilminster and Taunton. This includes the morning and evening peak hour service. The local highway authority.
Not interrupted.
Who are you? Because you
Excuse me. Sorry, but you'll be asked to leave if you interrupt again.
Thank you, Chair. The local highway authority is satisfied that the site has viable access to public transport, and national policy is clear that opportunities to access public transport will vary between urban authorities and rural counties. A range of local services and facilities, as well as bus stops, can be reached on foot from the site, with the proposed footway enhancements along Broadway Hill ensuring that these journeys are safe for future residents. The on-site open space and play provision proposed will be safely accessible for existing residents. As described within the officer's report, there is an established route between Broadway Hill and the primary school, with no recorded personal injury collisions along this route. We concur with the assessment of officers that Horton and Broadway are separate settlements with shared services and facilities. The planning application documentation has undertaken a robust assessment of impacts by ensuring that the cumulative impacts of the proposed and approved developments across both settlements is considered within our assessments. Accordingly, with respect to infrastructure, the application assumes that Horton and Broadway are a single settlement. However, for the purposes of the detailed design stage, the development proposals will need to have specific regard to the character of Horton, within which the site is located. In overall terms, and as a reminder, the proposed development would deliver a wide range of benefits, including the delivery of new homes to address the council's housing land supply shortfall and meet its identified needs, the delivery of new affordable homes to meet a critical need, the creation of a large swathe of multifunctional green space that will be accessible for both new and existing residents. 67% biodiversity net gain, economic benefits arising from the construction phase, as well as additional footfall that would boost the vitality of the settlements. And section 106 financial contributions, including towards healthcare. As set out within the officer's report for the 16th of June Planning Committee, the site is sustainably located and the scale of growth is proportionate to the settlement. Statutory consultees have no objections to the proposed development, and officers make a clear and robust recommendation to approve this application. We respectfully ask you to support the recommendation of your officers and approve this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you. We now ask the planning officer to address the issues that have been raised. I ask you not to talk in between us.
Obviously, I've heard a lot of strong feelings from local residents. Believe you me, I'm very sympathetic to that. I've been working as a planning officer for 37 years in different parts of this country. And I don't enter a recommendation for approval lightly on a scheme like this, but we have to, as planning officers, to adhere to national guidance, particularly if you look at the NPPF. When you don't have a 5-year supply, your local plan just doesn't carry the weight necessary to refuse an application like this. The way this should, a development like this should happen is an allocation in a local plan, without doubt. But you don't have a 5-year supply. And the NPPF is very clear that the presumption is in favour of development. And when you've got a situation like this where the statutory consultees, particularly in relation to those issues that you're very concerned about, flooding, the LLFA, so it can be satisfactorily drained, and there's been a comprehensive dialogue and exchange of information between the applicant and the LLFA on that, and they wouldn't recommend additional approval if they weren't happy that it can be satisfactorily drained. I outlined to you the strategy for achieving that. In terms of highways, if the highway officer was to say to me that the proposed pedestrian routes into the facilities are not acceptable, then that would be very different. That would be a potential reason for refusal, but they haven't said that. The highway authority is satisfied that there are no accidents that indicate that it wouldn't be safe. It's not ideal. It's far from ideal. We're not saying that it's ideal, but I say again, it's harks back to the fact that you don't have a 5-year supply, and sites like this that come forward. As a result of that, it reminds me of dealing with rural exception sites, that will be smaller, but they would grant the policy was to grant permission for sites that wouldn't normally receive planning permission. And then I would actually, in this kind of case, it is like that when you don't have a 5-year supply. And I think that, that's why you have a recommendation for approval. I've gone through all the issues. The statutory consult, there's no objections from the statutory consultees. So if you're going to refuse this application, you need to be very, very confident that you could defend a reason for refusal with evidence to demonstrate to an inspector that the application is unacceptable. So, as I said, it puts people like planning officers like me in a difficult position, because in my heart of hearts, as a human being, I doesn't sit comfortably to recommend an application like this for approval. But the reason I've outlined, that is why it is before you. It's primarily because you don't have a 5-year supply.
But now for members' questions, and first in the queue is Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll also declare interest again that I am the ward member. I don't know whether you'd indulge me or not, but I have got questions on each of those 5-6 points that we were asked to reconsider. And I would like to be able to ask the questions in point order, if that's permitted. The first one is education. What's the actual new evidence supplied by the Education Authority that are saying that they don't want any contribution whatsoever? The charge is absolutely fine, which is a separate catchment area, that the school is absolutely fine. It hasn't clarified what it defines as a catchment area. Has it considered the total pupil numbers cumulatively, i.e. already those that will be generated from existing developments, whether in train and being built out or actually being approved? Or have they just taken the 150 houses in isolation? Because I think anyone in charge will tell you that there is underperformance so far and that those developments will generate extra places. So how do they reach this? Can you actually give me, because they say they haven't really said anything in this. Frankly, it reads like smoke and mirrors because we're talking about still contributions in Rule 1 and Rule 123. Well, South Somerset quietly abandoned Rule 123 a long time ago. So why this has crept back in, it does feel like a rather smoke and mirrors answer. So please can you tell me the actual numbers, what the existing capacity is, what the capacity band was, and what the remaining places are. Just to say, the recent data shows that it's absolutely fine. I'm sorry, that's not good enough. I think you need to provide more evidence.
I can respond to that. I presented you in the report with the evidence explanation provided by the Education Authority. I mean, they would not make a recommendation for saying that the education contribution is not required if they weren't absolutely confident that was the case. They're the Education Authority. Why would they say that?
Well, I don't know. Ask them, because there is not adequate data to support what they're saying.
So
it's just a statement on solitude.
But obviously they use data to come up with that information, but I'm not part of that data. But as I said, why would they make a recommendation that the contribution is not required if they weren't confident and they would have data to demonstrate to their satisfaction that that is the case?
Can I stop there and ask?
Well, I will stop that there as well, and I will leave it for others if they wish to pursue that. Number two is the cumulative impact.
Please, Sue, I want to bring in Nikki on that point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. I just wanted to confirm for the avoidance of doubt that there is a very robust assessment by the Education Authority. The Education Officer is an RTPI chartered planner who understands planning and education requirements very well and will factor in cumulative impacts of permitted developments as well as birth rates, demographic changes. All of those things are put into quite complicated maths and put out to make a projection of the need. So obviously we have to be mindful of the test that we can only ask for money where there is a need that's directly related to the development that's necessary in planning terms. So all of those tests and those impacts are all considered when the Education Authority is coming forward with comments. And you'll note from the report that there is also some grant funding that's been secured by the Education Authority for SEND funding, which is further explanation that since the application is deferred as to why there is no SEND contribution in this case. So I hope that helps to clarify and reassure that there is very, very thorough, robust assessment by the Education Authority. If there is a trigger for funding, we find that they do put that forward. They're looking to see education contributions coming forward when they can be substantiated. Thank you.
Thank you for your explanation, but I would have thought that government funding is there as an additional, not as a substitute for developer contributions. Moving on. And we now move to the cumulative impact and cumulative growth. What assessment have you actually made of that cumulative growth, particularly its impact on roads, schools, amenities, local facilities? Have you taken the development in isolation, or have you considered all the other growth that's been pointed out?
The assessments and advice provided by the consultation takes into account the existing extant planning permission, so it takes into account that projected growth.
Then what actual impact what actual assessment has been made of that cumulative impact of growth?
I think this question has been answered already, so I'm going to move on now.
Let's bearing in mind that residents don't experience each planning permission in isolation. They experience the whole thing cumulatively, taken together as a whole. Has any account been taken of that?
That, as I say, that's been question, that's been asked and answered already. Councillor Power.
I'll just, sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really concerned about the safety of housing. Safety of housing.
Close to laptops, it doesn't like being too close to laptops.
Yeah.
At the same time, we need
Hear
to
me now?
close.
Yeah, right, yeah. As I was saying.
Move your laptop.
Hello, no, Sam, okay, that's
Go on.
That's right now. Regarding the, I'm going to step back now, to check my voice. Regarding the highways aspect, when there's, well, obviously you've presented some pictures regarding, you're saying that the roads are safe for pedestrians to walk to school. Where is designated safe crossing points that the highways officer said that this is a safe area for children to walk to school?
Well, the highway officer would have looked at the existing situation in his assessment and advised that the obstacles that it was safe in his opinion.
Chair, can I come back? Can I ask when the actual highways officer actually went to the site in the actual village? Instead of maybe looking on Google Maps, for example.
Thank you, Chair. We don't have a highways officer in the room at the moment. He's
I'm not asking that.
around, so we can't confirm whether he's been to site, but he will consider those issues. He'll also consider our standing at appeal, and assess it, make a balanced assessment on that. I hope that helps to reassure you that that's a robust assessment. The Highways Authority, because they are our statutory.
Councillor Well.
Thank you. Can the officer or anyone explain when it was decided that the Broadway and the Hall would be dealt with as one matter? Because it is undoubtedly a fact that when we dealt with this a month ago, we dealt with Horton alone. So somewhere along the lines, the fact that it has been suggested, I believe it was in the amendments to the local plan, which were never passed by South Somerset District Council, that villages would be joined, and the Horton and Broadway was one of them. When was the decision made? Because originally we dealt with this matter and deferred it because we felt that Horton, as a village, couldn't deal with the infrastructure and various other matters we heard as a village of Horton with 826 or whatever residents. Now we are being told today that we are dealing with Horton and Broadway as a combined area. So when did that happen? Because it certainly wasn't at the first application.
To just clarify, looking at the 1 second described is only in terms of being connected to facilities and service, not as being one settlement per se, and that's clear in both the original report and in the section 5 addresses that in terms of the approach in paragraph 83 of the MPP Act, where settlements share services, they can be treated as a connected settlement. So I don't think it's correct to say that it was treated entirely separately in that regard when you supported last time, because reference was made to services in Broadway as part of a connected settlement, but that's not to say that Horton is not a settlement in its own right.
Pass at the moment on that one, Jim.
Slide page.
Thank you, Chair. It's obviously very complex trying to sort of unpin all the arguments for and against this development. One of the things that does concern me is in a way, the quality and the transparency of the information we're getting as councillors. I share Councillor Osborne's concerns about this amazing lack of any requirement for educational contribution. And you've got 150 houses being added, and we're told that both the primary school and the secondary school are full. I think somebody raised that the minutes of that decision haven't been publicised. Just in terms of having confidence in the information we're receiving, I think we do need to have more transparency from people like the Educational Authority, the Highways team, to be able to reassure ourselves and the public that we really are on top of the facts. Thank you.
Councillor Best.
Right, I will come back to education in a minute. But first of all, on highways, you showed a picture earlier on of a 30-mile-an-hour sign and said that the entrance to the site was just behind. Now, does that mean that the entrance to the site's in the national, that one? And you said, is the entrance on the 30-mile-an-hour side or on the national speed?
No, it's on the 30-mile-an-hour side.
It is.
Yes,
okay, yeah, I thought you said it was behind, and also because we've had this on another application we've had, the design on a 30-mile-an-hour limit to a national speed limit is different. And how far away from the national speed limit is it?
Well, you can see the font on it. You can see the font behind.
Oh, right, okay, yes. Okay, that clears that up. Going back to education, I'm absolutely gobsmacked with what's written in this report. I can say from personal experience, I have two grandchildren that have got SEN requirements. We cannot get placements within South Somerset for them. So the idea that there's no contribution going into this, as Somerset Council, we're having an overspend on things like SEN. So to refuse any contributions in any way to education, I think is hopeless. At the moment, lots of parents are actually flooding over the border into Dorset to get education. So how we've gone from 2.5 million down to nothing with the SEN requirements of schools, at least without the rest. I know Hollywood are talking about expansion. So I'm just absolutely bewildered with this statement that's been put in.
And sorry, I come back. There's reference in the report to the funding that's been obtained to SEND. And that's why there's 19 million.
Yeah, but that's not allocated. That's a general fund. That doesn't mean in South Somerset we're going to get any of that money.
That's all.
Thanks. Could the officer or anyone explain what is accepted as adequate bus services? i.e., is one bus in the early morning with a returning bus in the evening, Monday to Friday, considered to be adequate bus services?
Members to decide that. It's really a very limited provision, but it is a consideration. Obviously, it's better than nothing, but it's far, it's a very limited service.
Can I come back one more?
Sure.
And also, could we have an explanation on the tipping balance, please? Because it is put in the regulations, if we haven't got a 5-year land supply, there's a tipping balance, which it seems to indicate that if there is sufficient to tip it against the fact we haven't got a 5-year land supply, we should be able to do that. Can you please, someone tell me whether we could turn this application down if we could tip the balance sufficiently by some of the things we've been hearing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. As you say, we need to engage the tip balance because we can't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. So the lower the housing land supply figure, the more we need to tip that balance. So we're looking at the harms and the benefits. So, I mean, you talk about public transport accessibility, that's a valid planning consideration. It's low public transport provision, so that can be considered in the planning balance, but we also need to consider some of the benefits, as you've seen in the report and the applicant has put forward. We also need to be mindful of our position at appeal. We've obviously had lots of speculative housing developments coming forward in Somerset. We've got lots of villages. We've had lots of planning committee meetings similar to this when you have lots of public concerns about the impact on facilities. And so we need to look at those benefits of delivering housing and affordable housing and the harms. And my strong advice would be that if members are looking to put this forward for refusal, to have a very strong evidence-based reason for refusal of the application. I also note that we don't have any objections from any of the statutory consultees, so it would be problematic to go down that route. It is suggested because we've had a lot of experience at appeals with this tilted balance engaged, and the harms need to be significant and demonstrable in order to succeed in defending an appeal. Thank you.
So, can I come back just one more time? With this, in fact, can go to appeal, we've been told it will be going to the new system.
Well, it would be referred to the Secretary of State for an option to call in.
Yes, thank you.
Which also gives an indication of the government's commitment to housing delivery. There's a really strong position on that. It comes through very clearly in the national policy. Obviously, we're expecting a new MPPF to come through probably in September. This is all more and more positive towards delivering housing, so it's something to bear in mind. Obviously, members are entitled to weigh the harms and the benefits differently to officers. Obviously, officers are mindful of appeal decisions and the context of this proposal. That's why the recommendation is put forward, so members can understand that. I appreciate it's very difficult. You know, you're listening to the levels of concerns, but also we need to be mindful of what our realistic prospects would be at appeal, and weigh that into the balance as well. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we all recognise the considerable weight that's given to housing, 5-year housing land supply, and also provision of affordable housing. But I think there are still concerns about the cumulative scale of development, the co-dependency of this development, and education and access to services. So can you explain precisely, because I don't think you've actually done that, can you explain precisely what weight is given to these harms in reaching the recommendation? And what is the weight? Because policy SS2 has not been abolished, it's not been set aside. It is still there. So what weight is still accorded to it? So that's part one. And part two is we also have something which, for some strange reason, didn't really get mentioned in this application, but it got mentioned in the previous application, which was much more technicality, much more technical about water schemes. And that is the placemaking principles for Somerset. We agreed those in August 24, so quite new. We look at number 6, the aspiration for car-free school transport. And people have spoken out on that, and even I think the officers conceded it's less than ideal. So how does that accord with our placemaking principles? And then there's number 9, safe connectivity to within rural communities themselves. There are no crossing points along any of those routes. There are no shelters for people to get out of the way. We have a 5-way junction.
Councillor Osborne, what's the question here?
My question is, Why have we disregarded the placemaking principles on this case, or appear to be? That's one of my questions. My other question is, can you explain precisely how that, what you put in that tilted balance? So for example, say 50% goes to affordable housing, 50% along with whatever to the land supply. But what is given to the harms? What balance do you give, or what weight do you give to the harms? But there isn't a credible bus service. Can you honestly get to work regularly on that bus service as it stands? Can you get into the next town to connect your connecting bus there? Does it actually work? Which is what you're asking if you're looking at pathway developments or rest of it. So it's with those. How much weight is being given to the proposed promise or proposal for an extension to the playing field? Has that been secured? And if not, why on earth are we adding weight to it when it's just an abstract proposal at the moment? So weight is being given to things like that. That's what I want to know is, you know, there are real harms here, and the cumulative impact as well of adding yet more houses to what is already a small community, where the facilities are designed for the existing population. They're not designed for a short-term massive expansion. And there's no guarantee that private providers will expand their facilities.
Thank you. Jim.
In terms of the weight, clearly we acknowledge those harms, and they're referred to in the report. As Nikki alluded to, we have to evidence those harms if you're going to refuse this application. If the provision of affordable housing can be clearly evidenced and it's going to be secured through a 106 agreement as an on the playing field, and that's why we can attribute weight to those. So it's not a case of not attributing enough weight to it. It is being able to evidence the harm that would occur, and the satisfying spectre that would be so harmful that it outweighs the benefit. As I've acknowledged already, it's far from ideal, but the fact is there are facilities available in Horton and in Broadway, and it's far from ideal way of reaching, but they are facilities. So
please.
I mean, it's for you to make that decision, but you have to be very mindful of the ability to evidence those harms if your view is that they outweigh the benefit.
Just another way, or in another way, Officer Marsh, if you live in Horton, did you get to and from work exclusively using public transport?
No. No, I don't think that sort of question is appropriate.
It is, because that's what we're arguing.
As previously discussed, that needs to be weighed in the planning balance. We need to consider what public transport provision there is, and we can weigh that in the planning balance. So if you want to give that very limited weight, we're entitled to do that as a planning committee. We're aware of that, but I'd also say that that level of public transport provision is quite common across our villages in Somerset. And I've personally been involved in appeals where there haven't been pathways to school, footpaths to school, and lost that appeal. There have been other developments coming forward. So this is why we're making these recommendations, because we've been through these types of arguments before, and we are suggesting that it seems likely that a planning inspector would not consider the harms that have been identified to be significant and demonstrable to warrant refusal in the tilted balance in the position that we are in. That's why the recommendations are coming forward. So we're not saying that it's perfect public transport provision. It's something that needs to be weighed in the planning balance. You know, and if you want to weigh that as a harm and you want to put high weight to that, you're entitled to do that as a committee. Thank you.
To as well, why that we seem to have disregarded a policy implemented by this council in August 2024, which was on placemaking principles for Somerset, because it doesn't seem to have been considered in this application, and perhaps it should have been.
Well, it has been taken into account. It's not been disregarded. It's referred to as a consideration. The landscape and place making officer who supports the application obviously refers to it. And you've heard the position with regards to accessibility issues. So, you know, not really more.
Councillor Platt.
Can I propose to move into the debate, Chair? Unless anyone else has any further questions.
If we finish with the questions, we'll move to debate. That's fine. That's I mark down as first speaker on the debate is Mr. Councillor Curley.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to clear a couple of things up. Education, I think, will be quite a hot one. And I think we've found across the board with lots of different applications that the school roles are projected to fall. And I think there have been some recent calculations where we've seen this, and it's come as a bit of a shock. I do note that when one of the speakers spoke, they talked about pupils actually coming into the village from outside. So I would presume that there is provision there already. I'd also like just to quickly address buses. We are aware in our rural communities, we do not have good bus services, but the way to improve those bus services is actually to get more people using them. And that's actually counterintuitively to have more housing. I hate to say it, but it's very, very true. In terms of bringing the number of houses into rural settlements, we have an obligation to deliver approximately 4 new frooms in Somerset. We are not going to be delivering a new froom. That is all going to have to go in to existing settlements. And I think our planning officer did a really fantastic job of summarising that. For me, this deferral came down to one particular issue. Why I was happy to back it as a deferral. The decision, it was about the sustainability of the 2 settlements and why they would be considered as one. And I think the reports have adequately answered those questions for me. I bring you on page 64 to 5.4. This approach is consistent with the National Planning Policy Framework. And below that in 5.5, it is also significant. The emerging Somerset local plan also identified Broadway and Horton to be dealt with as a single settlement in terms of planning. I am sympathetic to this approach. And I think in planning terms, I can see absolutely no reason to refuse this that is not going to be thrown back at us by the inspector. So at that point, I'm quite happy to propose this, Chair.
Councillor Powell.
Did I have my hand up? Oh, sorry. Got what I was going to say now. So I might come back. Sorry, apologies.
Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. It obviously is again, as I said before. Thank you, Chair. As I said before, this obviously is very complex. And we've been obviously put into the picture again as the national targets Somerset Council is facing. The fact that we haven't got a 5-year land supply. And I understand all that. But on the other hand, we're dealing with this particular application with these 2 rural villages, which are now being put together into a single village. And it does seem to me, and I felt this with other applications with villages, that this is an excessive number of houses. And it demonstrates to me a real sort of attack really on the idea of rural settlements, village life. And I know that we've got to meet certain targets, but I think the tilted balance should be sensitive enough to realise that maybe in this case, this isn't the right place for 150 houses. So I'm minded to turn down this application, but I'm still listening to other people in the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you. I now remember what I was on about. Sorry. I'll go regarding highways, and I've said it on many applications before, especially ones in my division, where pedestrian access is quite limited. I know what the officers have said. They said that the highways officers are happy with it. You know, they're more qualified in highways than me, but I'm going to stand by my ground. I still don't think it's safe. I wouldn't want my children in the future walking down that road. Preferably, I wouldn't want them walking down the road to Bruton half the time because they're too narrow. And especially if they're hopping across roads to get to school, and as someone said, it takes about 25 minutes for them to get to school, and that's not just with the younger ones. But also, I feel like we're sort of contradicting ourselves with active travel. We're promoting residents with active travel to promote them to walk to work, to walk to school, but the roads aren't safe. So I just don't feel that sits right with me at all. So I'm really considering voting against the application. I know that if it goes to appeal, the council loses out on money, but I think it's a precedent that this application is in the wrong place. I'm sorry.
Please finish. Councillor Osborne.
Oh, thank you. I have to concur with councillors Page and Powell. They put their points extremely well. It is a wrong application in the wrong place. You are completely upending your rules, your own hierarchy settlement, because 150 houses is even quite big for a rural centre. And there's already development in here, so the total number goes up to 207. So you're completely upending your settlement strategy, which still exists. It hasn't been, none of this has been abolished. As far as I know, we haven't cancelled any bit of that local plan. And it does feel as though there's almost a desperation to get this passed at all costs, at the expense of the villagers, that whatever they say, in terms of the bus service, it doesn't give you a meaningful service. So it's not going to get used. And another 400 people won't. People will vote with their wheels. And when it comes to that school run, and I did walk a chunk of it, I would be taking my kids to school, not as it's about nearly 2 kilometres. And certainly not in hot weather like this. I'd be going in a nice air-conditioned car. And when the weather is bad, I will be taking them in the car because it would be safer. You look at that 5-way junction. Oh, and by the way, there is another route to the school in the Middleville Centre. You can go all the way down Park Road and turn right into Broadway Road. That really would screw up your figures because, frankly, the table you gave us is meaningless because you haven't said what you based your figures on in terms of the speed of people walking. A young, fit man, and I remember that coming up at Cockburn night when the agent, who was young, fit and probably single, said, oh, I did this in 18 minutes. The room absolutely erupted, and the mums in the room said, try doing it with a pram and a toddler and see how fast you get. It really fundamentally isn't safe. There's no crossing points, there's no proposal to put anything in. I can't see any provisions for drop curbs for people who are less mobile and rely on wheel transport. There's no protection at that junction of Goose Lane for people to avoiding oncoming traffic because school run clashes head on with rush hour. And as we all know, that is a rat run. I use it myself, and I know. And when you talk about, oh, well, there hasn't been accidents, may I remind you, past performance is no guarantee of future performance. And in terms of accidents, I've only got one thing to say, there but for the grace of God. Probably just as well you've got 2 churches. I cannot, and I will not vote for this. And if I'm forced to vote for this, I will resign, in fact I'm considering it anyway, resigning from this committee because we can no longer stand up for our residents, we can no longer make our points, we are browbeaten by officers, as you have seen, to come to the right decision.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that's all I am tendering my resignation because this planning committee is no longer serving the needs of its community and it's no longer serving the needs of its people. And in all good conscience, I cannot do that.
And councillors and members of Board and Broadway, I apologise for my voice. I am stuttering a bit, but I feel I do need to say something at this point. Obviously, the community is very passionate about this application, and a lot of the councillors that have been talking are mindful. I here to refuse. Already I've been the planning officer, but I just wanted to remind you that there's been a lot of talk about refusal, but you do have to base your refusal on material planning reasons. And there's been a lot of talk, but I haven't heard those actual reasons being put forward. So you do need to make sure that you have those as a basis towards your refusal, if that's where you're going, because we do have to have something that's defensible in appeal. So just so that you are, just to remind you of those things. I know you are aware, but just to remind you at this point.
Let me go forward. So, Councillor Whale. So stands and then Councillor Best.
Thank you, Chair. This application, as we're told on many occasions, really goes down to this lack of the housing supply by year and the failure of South Somerset local plan. Quite frankly, had it been with a 5-year housing supply in place, we wouldn't even be looking at this. There is no way this one would have got anywhere near this committee because it's a totally inappropriate place to put 150 houses. And we all, locally, I'm local as well, I'm in charge. I know this area very well. And I should say that as if we're going to have to find reasons for refusal, the travel plan and also the facilities buses are totally inadequate. And to try and say in a report that they are or might be is misleading in great amounts. The overdevelopment, this is vastly overdeveloping a rural settlement, a site rather. It is not one which would be contemplated and shouldn't be contemplated. I think that is a reason. It's overdevelopment of the area, and there has also already been a fair bit of development, as we've heard, which is already in excess of what is expected under the local plan. The actual facilities for getting to and from the school has been mentioned a number of times. It is not suitable. I know it. Sue knows it. We all know it is not safe and suitable for a route to school. There's no argument that whether that is a reason under the planning laws to refuse to balance against the famous ticket balance, I don't know, but it's not. And anybody who knows it, if the highways officer has been there and seen it, I cannot believe that they would put it forward as a safe and proper route to school. I could not support on that and various other matters I've mentioned. I cannot support this if, as a member of this planning committee for many years, this is one of the worst examples of overdevelopment that I have seen in that 21 years. So I cannot support it.
I'm going to take two more, and I'm going to take a 10-minute break to see if we can find a mechanism where we can actually support a development. Yes. So let me go on with Councillor Stanton.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't on this committee at the last meeting when you deferred it. Because I'm substituting today. We've got 3 councillors missing, I think. Somebody said we've been browbeaten by officers. Let's get it on record. That is not true. It is not true. The officers have given a careful and thorough report. They've answered the questions and points raised with professionalism. What is true is that we, like all planning committees all around the country, are faced with a situation where we've got a national government that's determined to get houses built. And the new Secretary of State now, apparently is going to push it past. And here in Somerset, largely because of a ruling made by Natural England, just dwell on that, by Natural England in August 2020 to stop us building houses because of the alleged risk of phosphate pollution, a lot of which was spurious because most of the phosphates are coming from farms, not from human excrement and sewage works, and that's all been being dealt with anyway. As a result of that, we can't meet the requirement of a 5-year housing land supply for a long way from it. So those two things have put us as a council in a position where when we are minded to follow the kinds of arguments that have been presented, and I know that school route as well. I'm with Councillor Whale on that. It's not a safe route for walking children to school. But if we refuse the application, then it will go to the Secretary of State, be called in, and we'll have to pay a lot of money for the whole cost.
Point of order. Sorry, this isn't a theatre. Yeah, this is a judicial process. So people, please stay quiet.
I thought I heard somebody from the public suggest that our wasting your council tax money would be a good idea. Is that what I heard somebody say?
It's lives, yeah.
Please, as I said, it's not a theatre.
You see the dilemma we have. We're between a rock and a hard place here. So I haven't made up my mind yet quite how to vote, because this is an impossible situation that we're placed in by the government and by Natural England. But we're going to have to deal with it one way or the other.
Councillor Best.
Right. As everybody's quite clear and can see now, the frustration, especially around this committee, and it's only going to get worse with the reduction of powers that we actually have. The 5-year land supply seems to dominate everything. That's what we hear at every planning committee. Oh, you haven't got a 5-year land supply, you've got to give this. Interest from that would be that I've sat on these committees for many years. We've given quite a lot out across Somerset. It would be interesting to know the cumulative amount of permissions we've given. If those were built out in due time, would it give us a more reasonable land supply? Because at the moment, everybody knows that the developers hold the balance on the 5-year land supply. So in other words, they can adjust the figures by not developing. Going to this development and thinking about it, I've been at this for a few years, and we used to have a thing called safer routes to schools. And there was an emphasis not only of when you put a dwelling somewhere in the community or a series of dwellings, is to have a safer route for those children to get to school. I believe now the emphasis is now on, is it a walkable distance from that dwelling to the school rather than the safest passage? So looking at this development, I don't think it is a safer route to school. In that way, I can't support this. I think the whole thing over development and this, again, we've got this constant thing of the 5-year land supply and the calling, but it's not there.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to propose this, but can you give me a couple of minutes for 10 minutes? I think I've got Sue seconding this motion, this proposal. I just need 10 minutes to word it properly and speak to the legal team to see if it's sufficient to go forward, if that's okay.
Yes, that's acceptable. So we'll have a 10-minute break for you to do that. Okay, Councillor Power has.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I start, just like to say, just to let you know that I'd like to thank the officers for their help of what they've done with learning and with all the acronyms that we've got. So I just want to let you know that the officers can help us with this one. So I propose that we vote against this application due to the overdevelopment of the settlement and cumulative impact of a housing coming forward into the village, and the proposal will result in unacceptable levels of car dependency with a lack of safe, suitable and appealing non-car routes for pedestrian and cyclists to access the local facilities, resulting in unacceptable highway safety impacts and car dependence, contrary to SS2, TA5 and the placemaking principles and paragraph 115 on the NPPF. Thank you.
Have a second.
Yes,
That's,
Yes, I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Someone seen that? And we move to a vote. Those for this proposal?
2, 3, 4, 5. 5 in favour of refusal.
And those against?
2 and 3. 3.
So,
Abstention, so that refusal is carried, Chair.
I'd like to say the refusal is carried.
Thank you, Chairman.
So with that, we close the meeting.